I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
And action.
Sergeant Pickard, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
it's 3 p.m. It's Patrick Christys. It's GB News. Absolutely massive show today. We are on Boris Watch. He says that he is the victim of a witch hunt and a deranged stitch-up. But was he, though? That's what we're going to be drilling down into here. What is the validity of this report that has caused such a big kerfuffle? And will Boris Johnson now be better served finding himself a new party? But, of course, the latest from Nottingham as well. Some new information has emerged about the man believed to be responsible for those vile, horrific, depraved attacks that gripped just Nottingham and the nation as well. In other news, we're also going to be talking about a story that blew my mind, although nothing should surprise me anymore. Double child rapist and murderer Colin Pitchfork is going to be released from prison again. He was released on parole before and had to be taken back because he was approaching women out in the public. What on earth? What on earth is going on? It's just unbelievable. And also, we're going to be talking a bit about this as well. Another shocker. A Sudanese refugee who was granted leave to remain whilst facing a conviction for a rape charge has now been found guilty of that rape charge. Patrick Christys on GB News. Get the emails coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Do you think that Boris Johnson is the victim of a witch hunt and a stitch-up? gbviews@gbnews.com. Now, though, it's your headline.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson has rejected the findings of the inquiry, which says he deliberately misled Parliament over Partygate. The report says the former Prime Minister committed a serious contempt and was complicit in the campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. Mr Johnson describes it as a deranged conclusion and accused the inquiry of hypocrisy. The former PM would have faced a recommended suspension of 90 days had he not quit as an MP. MPs will debate the Privileges Committee report into his conduct on Monday. Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner says he should never have been Prime Minister.
Well, I think the Privileges Committee is pretty damning. You know, it's serious. Boris Johnson is not only a lawbreaker but a liar. He's not fit for public office and he's disgraced himself and continues to act like a, pound-shot Trump in the way in which he tries to discredit anybody who criticises his actions when actually a decent public servant would have done the honourable thing, would have had a little bit of humility and would have apologised to the British public for what they put them through.
Liberal Democrats Deputy Leader Daisy Cooper believes Boris Johnson's political career is over.
What we've seen today is absolutely extraordinary. Quite frankly, it should be the final nail in the coffin of Boris Johnson's political career. I think people here in Mid-Beds and around the country want Rishi Sunak to step up and confirm that he will never, ever allow Boris Johnson to stand as a candidate ever again.
And here's how voters have been reacting to the report.
He did an excellent job in a difficult situation, so I don't see how they can down him now for what he made a mistake. So did hundreds of others. They don't get followed up.
He's the kind of guy that if you were having a party, you'd want him to come. He's a nice, fun guy, but as leader of the country, no.
Under the circumstances, yes, things, could have been different, but still, nobody else could have done it. He got the job done.
Detectives have been given a further 36 hours to question the man suspected of murdering 3 people in Nottingham, and they've confirmed he was a former student of the university. A vigil and a minute's silence will be held later, honouring Grace O'Malley Kumar, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates, who were killed on Tuesday. Their families, friends and thousands of students gathered at the university yesterday. The Home Secretary has laid flowers outside Nottingham Council House ahead of the vigil in the Old Market Square from 5:30 this afternoon. The mother of a 9-year-old boy who suffered more than 50 injuries to his body has been jailed over his death. Carla Scott was sentenced to 27 years for child cruelty and the manslaughter of her son Alfie Steele at their home in Droitwich in Worcestershire. Her partner Dirk Howell has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 32 years for his murder. Outside court, Detective Chief Inspector Leighton Harding said justice had been served.
At no stage has either Scott or Howell shown any sign of remorse or acceptance of responsibility for their actions. The custodial sentences passed on Howell and Scott are a clear reflection of the abhorrent physical and emotional abuse they both inflicted upon Alfie. And while I recognise that no sentence will ever undo the dreadful abuse that Alfie suffered, it does mean that Scott and Howell will now face the consequences of their sickening actions.
A double child killer has been granted parole and will be released from prison subject to conditions. Colin Pitchfork was jailed for life in 1998 for murdering 2 teenagers. He strangled Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth, who were both 15, in Leicestershire in 1983 and 1986. The Ministry of Justice says the decision will be very upsetting for their families. It plans to ask the Parole Board to reconsider its decision. A massive search for survivors continues after a boat capsized off the southern coast of Greece yesterday. The Coast Guards released an image of the crowded vessel before it sank. At least 79 migrants drowned and hundreds are still missing, feared dead, including children. It's being described as one of Europe's deadliest disasters of its kind in recent years. And tributes are being paid to double Oscar-winning actress and former Labour MP Glenda Jackson, who's died aged 87. Her agent confirmed she died peacefully this morning with her family by her side at her home in London. She won Oscars for Women in Love and A Touch of Class, but gave up acting to join the House of Commons as an MP in North London from 1992 to 2015. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back over to Patrick.
Have we just witnessed one of the most undemocratic and illegitimate political stitch-ups of all time? Here's a bit of context for you. The Privileges Committee wanted to suspend Boris Johnson for 90 days. The only person, as far as I can tell, suspended for longer is disgraced former Labour MP Keith Vaz after he was caught in a sting operation expressing willingness to buy cocaine for male prostitutes. Let that sink in. There is a massive discrepancy there, isn't there? They found Boris guilty of deliberately misleading the House and deliberately misleading the committee. Talking of actual guilt, it is also worth noting that the only time Boris was fined by the Met Police was alongside the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, when he says he ate some birthday cake at his work desk. Talking of misleading the committee, there were some rather shocking allegations levelled against one Bernard Jenkins yesterday, a member of said committee, that suggests that he attended a lockdown-breaking booze and cake-fuelled birthday bash for his wife. My points here are thus. If the Met Police were satisfied that Boris didn't break the rules for the most part, and perhaps members of the committee judging Boris did break the rules, then isn't the whole thing cast into serious doubt? Boris alludes to the committee taking a mystic Meg approach to their conclusions. He says he didn't see any rule breaking from the media room one evening as he made his way up the stairs to bed, whilst people in that media room were preparing the communications late at night over a potential no-deal Brexit and a Christmas lockdown. Now, either they genuinely didn't believe him, or they'd already decided Boris was a liar. Enter Harriet Harman, who had reposted a blog by former Labour spin doctor Alistair Campbell that said that Boris and then Chancellor Rishi Sunak broke their own emergency laws, they lied repeatedly, they trashed the ministerial code. Right, so maybe, just maybe, the committee's chairman had already made her mind up. And then there's the more sinister elements to the committee's findings. They've done him for questioning the validity of the committee. Well, I'm sorry, but this isn't North Korea. And considering what I've just said about some of the people on that committee, I don't really think there's much wrong about raising serious questions, is there? Then they say Boris was complicit in a campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. Well, excuse me? Boris Johnson has suffered more abuse than any of them. He's been hounded non-stop and completely trashed. He's even had to face claims that he wasn't really in intensive care with COVID. Just horrific, nasty stuff. A bit like Dominic Raab, actually, who was ousted after a campaign of untrue media leaks by anonymous civil servants. These ridiculous pearl clutches. Oh, you dare to question our motives, and then you made us feel all horrible inside. Jog on. Look, every single person involved in this process is a loser. Boris, the committee, the public, the taxpayer. But you know what I really hope comes out of all of this? One little victory for us all. Is that the next time there is a question mark about completely restricting the public civil liberties, making it illegal to behave like normal human beings, those people in positions of power won't do it, because they will take one look at what's happened to Boris and what may well end up happening to people like Bernard Jenkins, and they'll think, I don't want any part of this. It will come back to bite me. Well, those are my views. You can, of course, get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.com. I do want to hear from you. We are going to be running a lot, as you can imagine, with this Boris Johnson story throughout the course of the day with a whole host of MPs. And some of those MPs have been giving their reaction to today's report, including GB News presenter and Conservative MP, the one and only Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Parliament sometimes makes a great mistake when it tries to stand on its dignity. In the old days, people who said disobliging things about Parliament were summoned to the bar of the House. They last did this with John Junor in the 1950s when he accused members of fiddling their petrol allowances. The House of Commons made itself, in its righteousness, look foolish. And I think that this report is in danger of making the House of Commons look foolish.
What I would say about the committee is they deserve respect, but in order to get respect, they actually have to behave themselves in a respectful way. Now, I was there when Boris Johnson gave his evidence, and that committee was sitting in what they say is a quasi-judicial role, like a jury in a court. But unlike a jury in a court, some of the members of that committee were pulling faces, they turning their backs on Boris. I mean, it was absolutely extraordinary behaviour. And if it were a court, the judge would have called it to order.
The emails are flooding in like I've rarely seen before. gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them coming. I promise you I will go to them. Some really fascinating takes in here. But GB News' Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, joins me in the studio now. Tom, deliberately misleading the House, deliberately misleading the committee, breaching confidence, impugning the committee, being complicit in the campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. This is all about them, not Boris Johnson.
It's interesting. You list there the 5 charges that Boris Johnson has been placed under, really, with regard to the justification for this 90-day suspension, the second longest suspension of any MP for over 70 years. That's the most incredible punishment,
Which was the words reminding what Keith Vaz did to get that suspension, which pales into insignificance considering some birthday cake, for goodness sake.
So it's interesting, looking at those 5 charges. One is to do with what was said at the dispatch box of the House of Commons, the whole justification for this entire investigation in the first place. And 4 of the 5 are all about the committee. It's about how he behaved towards the committee, how the committee has felt aggrieved, how the committee feels there's been this campaign against them, how the committee felt like he disrespected them, all the rest of it. That piles in to end up with this most extraordinary sentence, for want of a better word. Now, of course, the committee cannot have the power itself to just decree that this is what Boris Johnson must face. They make a recommendation to Parliament, and Parliament will vote on this on Monday.
OK.
However, I think it's a bit of a misnomer to say this is ultimately down to Parliament. This is ultimately down to the committee for this reason. When Parliament has before tried to reject the recommendation of a committee like this, remember the last time that happened? Well, it was the Owen Paterson scandal. Owen Paterson was recommended a suspension of the House of just over 10 days. And Boris Johnson's government tried to say, hang on, this man's wife committed suicide, there's a compassionate case here, we should run this process again with a different committee. That was all thrown out the water because of the sort of how it impugned the government's operation. Ultimately, what that case proved is that Parliament cannot really reject the recommendation of a committee.
And I get
like
that, and
this.
especially not if it's going to become a pseudo-crime to actually cast any kind of aspersions onto a committee whatsoever. Put the political bias angle into perspective for me. Some people are saying, hang on a minute, this is a bit of a political stitch-up. We've got a load of people who didn't like Boris Johnson and a load of people like Harriet Harman who had maybe already made their minds up that Boris Johnson was a serial liar. Is there any truth to that?
I think it's certainly true that if you look at the statements from the committee chairperson, Harriet Harman, she has tweeted things that suggest that she does not believe the words that Boris Johnson says. She has tweeted that he broke lockdown rules, that she has tweeted that he misled the House. She has, in many ways, proved herself to be prejudicial to this arrangement. And I think the other thing that is important to note here is some people say there's a Conservative majority. There are 4 Conservative MPs sitting on this committee. The kind of Conservative MPs that sit on this committee are not those who are predisposed towards Boris Johnson. There's a lot of personal animosity there, and I think that's important context.
It is. Tom, thank you. Tom's obviously going to be playing a major role in this show. Our deputy political editor as we pick through this. But somebody else who I think you're going to find absolutely fascinating, and listen up to what this guy has to say, OK, is barrister and writer at The Spectator, Stephen Barrett. Stephen, thank you very, very much. It's great to have you on the show. We have raised some serious questions here about potential political prejudice and bias. I am also very confused that the Met Police could look into a huge amount of things that are in this report and conclude that nothing was really done that wrong. What is the validity, in your view, of the Privileges Committee report?
The entire thing, as law, is a car crash. So I don't feel that it has any validity. And those of us who say this, see now, because the committee is apparently leaking like anybody's business, which, I mean, one used to think that was a contempt of Parliament, but fine. There seems to be now a suggestion that there is a conspiracy if any of us say this. And I want to explain to your viewers why that's just absurd. If you and I play Monopoly, then you need 4 houses to buy a hotel. Okay, and then if you go away and I play Monopoly with Tom, then we'll still need 4 houses to buy a hotel. And if I go away and some other people play Monopoly who I've never even met, they'll still need 4 houses to buy a hotel. And that's why on Saturday, a very respected KC, I actually missed it, but he published in the Telegraph that Harriet Harman, if this was a court, if this was a respectable quasi-judicial procedure, Harriet Harman would have stood down as chair. And she has not stood down as chair. He reached that conclusion, not because he and I had some sort of chat. I'd never chatted to him. He reached that conclusion because he read the rules and he applied them consistently. And that's what law is. Law is not a conspiracy, nor is law emotional, nor is law an attack on anybody. I mean, I've never, I genuinely refer to the committee. And that's because it's sitting as one judicial panel. Now, the one judicial panel was chaired by somebody who shouldn't have been chairing it. So it should have dissolved itself. If it was a panel of law lords, we did this in 1999. When you have a problem with the judge, and we had a problem with one judge among 5, So I'm afraid we had to rip up the conclusions they came to, and we dissolved the panel. He had to stand down, but so did the others. And because the issue was important, we reconstituted the panel, and 5 entirely new judges came. I mean, Mike, I think it was Tom mentioned the behaviour of them in the committee. If it were a court of law, I would have an automatic appeal if the judge acted the way many members of that committee acted. It was risible. We have much case law saying things like, if the judge rolls their eyes and starts laughing when the defendant gives evidence, obviously you can appeal. And I do think that one of the problems here structurally is that there is no appeal process.
Yeah,
so, I mean, I think... Sorry
I just want to get you on another issue, if that's OK, which is that they are being asked to make decisions based around what they think may or may not have been going on in Boris Johnson's head. And if you then look at the alleged political bias that we're talking about and personal bias that we're talking about, that, frankly, does that not cast the whole thing into question completely?
Yes, and I mean, 9 months ago, when the most respected barrister we've got, who's also a lord, who is quite obviously not in any way favourable to Boris Johnson, he beat him on the prorogation case. He caused massive embarrassment to Boris. When he wrote to them and said, I have very serious concerns about how you're behaving, and they decided to simply ignore him, that should have been a massive red flag. Now, another member of the committee is now potentially facing investigation. They knew that before they published. Okay, my view is that if that happened in a court case, you wouldn't publish the judgment. Okay. You'd pause the judgment. You might have it in draft form, but you would pause it, and the judge would probably suspend themselves while the investigation was happening. And then if anything came about it, the judge might step down and you'd never publish. So to publish this morning is an extraordinary thing to do. It's an extraordinarily lawless thing to do. The committee criticised Boris for deferring to the police. That is actually the normal, lawful thing to do. Parliament is not above the police. It has special protections in our constitution, but they are using them to become entirely lawless and to ignore the rule of law. So if anybody wants to respect that, that's entirely up to them. I mean, human beings, if they want to, can live in entirely lawless countries.
Yeah, Stephen, look, thank you. I could talk to you all day. We haven't got the time for it, but I really appreciate you coming on. And I think just shedding some legal light on all of this. Stephen, take care. I'll chat to you very soon. Stephen Barrett there, barrister and writer at The Spectator. Right, OK, detectives, in other news, have been granted another 36 hours to question the suspect who was arrested after 3 people were killed in Nottingham on Tuesday. And in the last few minutes, Suella Braverman has laid a wreath in the city. That's the Home Secretary. I will have all of the up-to-the-minute updates on those Nottingham killings very, very shortly. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Conclude the...
Welcome back. In a few minutes, we'll have more reaction to the Partygate report and Boris Johnson's bombshell response. The emails that are coming in are absolutely box office as well. I'm going to go to those shortly, gbviews at gbnews.com. But before that, police have revealed that the man arrested on suspicion of murdering 3 people in Nottingham was a former student at the University of Nottingham. They've also called in the independent watchdog after it has emerged a police vehicle was following the suspect's car when it collided with 2 people. Let's go now to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who's in Nottingham for us. Mark, look, thank you very much. So, some developments in terms of information about this alleged attacker, but also the timeline of events.
Yes, absolutely. Before we get to that, though, I think we should mention that just within the last few minutes, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has arrived here in Nottingham. She has gone to Old Market Square, where there will be a vigil at 5:30 this evening to lay flowers as a mark of respect, really performing a task that so many Home Secretaries have had to perform over the years, that solemn ceremony of paying their respects after a terrible tragedy. We remember Amber Heard, of course, attending so many events in 2017 after multiple terrorist attacks, or Priti Patel in 2021 after the murder of Conservative MP Sir David Amess. So Suella Braverman here to pay her respects and confirm, of course, that at this stage, Patrick, we are still no nearer to understanding what the motivation for Tuesday morning's terrible atrocities was. All we know is that this 31-year-old is still in custody with another 36 hours granted to continue interviewing him, and confirmation from Nottinghamshire Police that he was himself a former, or is himself a former, University of Nottingham student. Now, the university have issued a statement in response to that, saying that they're devastated to learn that this man was himself a former student. They say that, the police have confirmed to them that they don't believe that that was a motivation for the attacks, because, of course, 2 other students, 19-year-old Grace Somali Kumar and, again, 19-year-old Barney Webber, were walking home in Ilkeston Road, just near their student accommodation, when they were attacked and fatally stabbed. We had that very heart-rending vigil that took place at the university yesterday, that will be followed, of course, by this second vigil taking place in Old Market Square this evening. And some more detail, Patrick, on the timeline of events, as you mentioned there, the fact that police now believe that the stabbings of the 2 students took place first at around 4 a.m. Then this prime suspect moved a few streets away to this assisted accommodation centre for vulnerable homeless people. He tried to get in, he bashed on the windows there, tried to open a window and was punched in the face and punched back by a resident and retreated at that point. Then the police say he moved on to Magdala Road again a few streets away from this residential complex, where he flagged down this white van being driven by the school caretaker Ian Coates, and then fatally stabbed Mr. Coates before stealing his van and driving here to Milton Street. It was in Milton Street at a bus stop just behind me where police say the suspect smashed that van into a local member of the public on the street. That man critically injured. An update on his condition, Patrick. According to the police, they say he is now in a serious condition, so some cause for optimism that his condition is improving. And also some more new detail, that is that 2 other pedestrians who were injured were not injured here on Milton Street, but a nearby street, Sherwood Street. And that incident has now been referred to the Independent Office for Police Conduct. And that's because a marked police vehicle was following that stolen van at the time that it careered into those 2 other pedestrians. So the police have now passed it on to the police watchdog for them to investigate that everything was handled appropriately.
Mark White, thank you very much. Our Home Security editor there from Nottingham. OK. Now, throughout the course of this show, we're going to be hitting a load of different topics. You've heard the Boris Johnson stuff there. I'm going to be returning to that in just a second, actually, now with some of your emails. Also, we'll be keeping an eye, of course, on Nottingham. I am also going to be talking about a couple of big stories that I know have gripped you as well, like Colin Pitchfork, for example, being released from prison again. This double child rapist murderer has been allowed out on parole yet again, after last time having to be recalled because he was approaching women. I mean, the mind boggles. But I will go to the inbox now anyway. Loads of you have been flooding in with your views on this Boris Johnson partygate thing. This whole thing is a sham. A kangaroo court that should hang their heads in shame. It's hypocritical and spiteful and self-righteous. That is from Doreen. Thank you very much, Doreen. A lot of this coming in at the moment. I'll just go to a couple of others as well. Patrick, this is an absolute shocker. If they can do this to Boris Johnson, they can do this to anybody. That's Kathleen. And the kangaroo court should be challenged in a proper court of law, says Martin. So, yes, I mean, there is a lot going on here. I have voted Conservative since inspired by David Cameron. Inspired by Cameron, good grief. Boris was always my favourite politician, as he is relatable with the public. But today is a sad day for democracy, and that's from Julie. And if you need reminding, which I'm sure you don't, Boris Johnson was essentially found guilty by the Privileges Committee report of deliberately misleading the House, deliberately misleading the committee, breaching confidence, impugning the committee and thereby undermining the democratic process of the House, which is a little bit North Korea, if you ask me, and being complicit in a campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. Another reminder that Boris Johnson was fined once by the Metropolitan Police for eating some cake at his work desk, and the only other person that we can see on records who was received a longer sentence, as it were, from the House would have been Keith Vaz over the old willingness to procure drugs for male prostitutes, which I think you can all agree there's a massive discrepancy between that incident and anything that Boris Johnson has done. But alas, this is the world that we live in. We'll have loads more between now and 4 o'clock. Boris Johnson accuses the Privileges Committee of reaching a deranged conclusion. I'll be getting stuck into that and asking, crucially, what next for Boris as well? Should he start a new party? Would you vote for that? But we're all sick of Just Stop Oil protesters, aren't we? Bringing the country to a standstill. Well, now one of them has been whinging because the police have actually done their job and arrested her. There is a great video of this, a tremendous video, which I will show you very shortly. But now it's your headlines with Rihanna.
Thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon. It's 3:31, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson has rejected the findings of the inquiry, which says he deliberately misled Parliament over partygate. The report says the former Prime Minister committed a serious contempt and was complicit in the campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. Mr Johnson describes it as a deranged conclusion and accused the inquiry of hypocrisy. The former PM would have faced a recommended suspension of 90 days, but had he not quit as an MP. MPs will debate the Privileges Committee report into his conduct on Monday. Detectives have been given a further 36 hours to question the man suspected of murdering 3 people in Nottingham, and they've confirmed he was a former student of the university. A vigil and a minute's silence will be held later, honouring Grace Somani Kumar, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates, who were killed on Tuesday. The Home Secretary has laid flowers outside Nottingham Council House to honour the victims. The mother of a 9-year-old boy, Alfie Steele, who suffered more than 50 injuries to his body, has been jailed over his death. Carla Scott was sentenced to 27 years for child cruelty and the manslaughter of her son at their home in Droitwich in Worcestershire. Her partner, Dirk Howell, has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 32 years for his murder. And double child killer Conan Pitchfork has been granted parole and will be released from prison subject to conditions. Pitchfork was jailed for life for strangling Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth in Leicestershire in 1983 and 1986. They were 15 years old. The Ministry of Justice says it will ask the Parole Board to reconsider its decision. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2728 and €1.1674. The price of gold is £1,536.49 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,614 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Well, we go back to our top story today, and the long-awaited Privileges Committee report has found that Boris Johnson was deliberately disingenuous about partygate events. So the report by the 7-member Privileges Committee followed a year-long investigation and runs to 106 pages. It will be fascinating to learn how much it's cost the taxpayer as well. The former Prime Minister stood down as an MP last week after receiving an advance copy in which he accused the committee of bias. I am joined now by former Labour MP Shaun Woodward. Shaun, thank you very, very much. Boris Johnson has said essentially this is a kangaroo court riddled with bias that stems right from the top and that it's a complete stitch-up.
Well, I would say that that's classic Boris, isn't it? Because it's unquestionably the case that this report came about because a Conservative-run House of Commons allowed the committee to do the work, and a majority of members on that committee are Conservatives.
They're not favourable to him, though, are they? I mean, you were a Conservative once.
Well, at the end of the day, the Conservative Party elected him to be their leader, and the Conservative Party doesn't want him to be their leader anymore. And I think what Boris is having to face here is a very sad moment for him personally, which is he no longer has the confidence of the party. And the thing we know about Boris is that if he'd thought for a moment he could win the by-election he'd effectively have to have in his constituency to prove everybody wrong, he'd have had it. And what we know is that last Friday he reached that conclusion. He'd lost.
One thing I just want to pick you up on there that I think you said, which is that the Conservative Party elected him as their leader. The British public elected him as their leader with a stonking majority, and it is 7 people. It's fair to say none of them particularly favourable to Boris Johnson, one of whom, in the shape of Harriet Harman, had previously evidenced the way that she felt about Boris as a demonstrable liar, that have helped to biff this guy. And is that not undemocratic? If that happened to you, you'd be raging, wouldn't you?
Well, you are, of course, describing a presidential system, not the British system. The British system is actually that the Prime Minister is the leader of the largest party that can form a government in the House of Commons. So if you run for an election...
But they won because of Boris, didn't they?
Well, not necessarily. What they did was they won because they had the majority of Conservative seats. That allows him to be the Prime Minister. Once he's lost the confidence of his party, which is what he did, he can no longer lead them. And that's really the critical thing. And having been a Member of Parliament and a Secretary of State, That's something that I think is often misunderstood by people, which is when you're the leader of the party, you have to lead your party in the House of Commons. And what happened to Boris last year, the reason he had to go was he'd lost the confidence of his party. He couldn't lead them.
When you look at the evidence that's been published by the Privileges Committee and you compare that to the fact that the Met Police only actually fined Boris Johnson for one thing, which was eating cake at his work desk with our current Prime Minister, OK, why should this Privileges Committee carry more weight than the Metropolitan Police?
Well, first of all, what they were investigating was whether Boris had misled Parliament. The misleading of Parliament is a contempt of Parliament, and the Privileges Committee was investigating that. So this isn't, as Boris Johnson was trying to throw around last night, about whether Bernard Jenkins, for example, may or may not have attended a drinks party. It's about whether or not, at the dispatch box, as the Prime Minister, you told the House of Commons a truth or not. And what the committee found was that on 4 occasions he had misled the House of Commons.
That committee was led by somebody who had already come out and said that this man's a liar.
Yeah, but with huge respect here, this isn't about whether or not Harriet Harman thinks he's a liar or not. This is about whether or not there are, and there are, if you've read the report, and I don't know if you've actually read it.
I've read the vast majority of it, yeah.
Well, it's worth reading all of it, because when you get, for example, the instances of an official in number 10 effectively holding their head in their hands thinking, he's not telling the truth, you're in a completely different ballgame. And what the committee did was simply to record the fact that on 4 occasions, clearly he misled the House of Commons. And I think there's one incredibly important sentence, which is the frequency with which he closed his mind to the truth. And that's really the issue here. Boris Johnson knew he was doing it wrong.
To be fair, what you've done here now twice is tell me what the issue isn't, and that's very convenient. That plays into people's hands if they think that Boris Johnson is a demonstrable liar who should be ousted. That it doesn't matter that Bernard Jenkins may have broken the rules and got boozed up at his wife's birthday party. It doesn't matter that Harriet Harman had already concluded that Boris was a liar in the meantime. But it does matter that Boris Johnson subjectively closed his mind to the truth.
What matters is whether or not on those 4 occasions he was questioned in the House of Commons, whether or not he misled the House.
And how can you tell what's going on in a man's head?
Sorry?
How can you tell what's going on in a man's head? Because that's what this comes down to.
Well, because the evidence that they've taken, the evidence they've gathered, the evidence from the officials in number 10...
But that's the problem, is it not? Because where is in that report the hard evidence that Boris Johnson...
He had a birthday party in the Cabinet Room. You didn't need to have that. He had a birthday party when some people were unable to say goodbye to their loved ones in a hospital.
That birthday party is quite misleading of you to say, is it not? Because that is the infamous ambush by cake incident in which Rishi Sunak turned up early for a works meeting and was fined as a result of it. And Boris Johnson, and this isn't really disputed, ate that cake at the desk where he works. So, you know, this isn't Fabric Nightclub.
That's the problem with being Prime Minister. You have to take a lot of responsibility, and it shouldn't have happened. We stopped people saying goodbye to their loved ones who were dying from COVID. The idea that somehow it's OK, because you're the Prime Minister, to have a birthday cake and a birthday party with your wife present and so on.
Did you support those
It's different.
Did you support those rules?
Did I support the rules? I didn't like the rules, but we actually kept to them. We had a family Christmas that we had meant to be happening. The rules changed. We were told we couldn't have it. In huge misery, we didn't have it. My family were not able to be together. But I thought look, the issue here, once again, I think for me, is not whether or not, in extraordinary circumstances, the government may or may not have come up with the wrong rules. The issue for me, everyone's allowed to make those mistakes. The issue for me is whether or not you two followed them. In other words, I'm going to tell you how you can live your life and what you cannot do. You cannot say goodbye to your wife, your husband, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your son, your daughter who's dying. But I can have a birthday party. And if you as Prime Minister don't know, there's something wrong there. It's not about whether Harriet Harman is a good or a bad person, whether Harriet Harman judges you one or another.
Again, I would argue, I don't think there's much question about being a good or a bad person, it's whether or not there's any political bias here. If Harriet Harman, it does matter, because if she's one of the people who's in control of this report, then that does really matter.
But she wasn't judging anything other than when he came to the House of Commons.
But she'd already said that he was a liar.
Yeah, but that was her view. But she's not.
Well, yes. But if I said before you walked in here,
yeah,
not Sean. I can't stand Sean, right? And then you turned up, right? Do you think I would give you a fair interview?
I think we could still have a conversation. Yeah.
Okay.
I think. Look. People can have their views, but the question is, when you come into the courtroom, when you come into that quasi-judicial body, are those people able to conduct themselves in an appropriate way? I happen to judge whether people are Conservatives or Labour or Liberal Democrats, that they do, and by and large my view, after spending 18 years in the House of Commons, was that most people there are very good people. It's not about them being Tories or Labour or whatever else they might be. They're good, decent people who want Parliament to be respected. And what Boris didn't do was he didn't respect Parliament, and that's the crime that he's been found guilty of.
I am keen to move this on a little bit, because I think you have quite an interesting point possibly to make about what next for Boris, because this is something I'm going to be talking about a bit later in the show. Will he break away from the Tories, join a new party, do whatever? I don't know. What do you think will be next for Boris? You just think it's...
First of all, I think Rishi Sunak right now must be having a horrible time. I mean, I want to see Keir Starmer in Downing Street, but I have to say that I think Rishi Sunak is quite a formidable opponent. I'm looking at him right now, and he does not look like a person who is allowing himself to be really ruffled by a lot of heat that's taking place. I suspect this time next year, Rishi Sunak will look back on this time and first of all say, it was terrible, but thank goodness it happened then, not in a general election campaign. And I think for the Labour Party, there's a real caution here to be had, because this is ideally what would have happened in the 3 or 4 weeks of a general election.
Yeah.
You'd have had Boris exploding.
Total turmoil.
You'd have had Doris and all those other people making all the noise they're doing, and it would have been your news every day. But it's happening now, probably 15 months before an election. So, yes, it's awful for the Prime Minister, but actually he's been a bit lucky in some ways. But isn't it paradoxical that Boris has brought this on himself? And that's what's so extraordinary about Boris. I mean, he makes the weather, and it's right now him making the weather in such a big way. Nadine Dorries doesn't know what to do anymore. And it's also interesting to see all those people in the tailstream of Boris completely lost. Do I resign now? Do I not resign now? Do I take back my threat of resignation for tomorrow? Do I play it out?
Do you think that there was any kind of concerted witch hunt? When I look at, and I've been trawling through a huge amount today of, yes, this committee's report, Boris Johnson's response, but also trying to go back to when people wanted the Met Police to get involved. I mean, there was even a situation where people wanted to bring legal action against the Met Police for not investigating Boris Johnson enough. I mean, that is a concerted attempt by people to get this guy out. And I do put it to you that you want him out because he would win again. He'd beat your man Keir Starmer, and it is in your interests.
If you were to ask Tony Blair, did he feel there was a concerted effort to get him out from the time of the Chilcot inquiry and everything else, I think he'd say to you, this just goes with the territory. Was there a concerted effort to get Mrs Thatcher out from round about the time of the poll tax? Unquestionably. In fact, before the poll tax, if you look at all those people who identified themselves as a certain kind of Tory rather than, you know, the wets and the dries, this is the nature of things. But a really interesting other point for you to think about is there is a certain kind of politician, Boris, Donald Trump, they're very different in some ways, but the similarities of these figures, both of them believe that rules apply to other people, not themselves. They are huge performers on a global stage, but the problem is the rules catch up with them.
Look, thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this chat, and let's do it again soon. All right, take care. That's former Labour MP Sean Woodward. What do you make of it all? The emails are obviously coming in thick and fast. Just keep it coming. gbviews@gbnews.com. We'll bring you more interviews on this huge story throughout the course of this show with top, high-profile political guests. Now, get this on gbnews.com. It's the fastest growing national website in the country, don't you know? It's got the best analysis and opinion, as well as all of the latest breaking news. But a bit of breaking news for you. Oh, here we go. And it's connected to Boris Johnson. The by-election in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, triggered by Johnson's resignation, will take place on Thursday, July the 20th. OK, so a bit of breaking news for you. It's connected to Boris. The by-election in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, triggered by Johnson's resignation, will take place on Thursday, July the 20th. That by-election, as well in Selby and Ainsty, which comes after the departure of Nigel Adams, will also be on the same day. So buy one, get one free when it comes to by-election now, people. Now, the police have finally got their act together and they've started arresting some of those menaces from Just Stop Oil. But guess what? They do not like it one little bit. When I come back, you will be howling with laughter at this video. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, I'm taking the show on the road. We'll be live in Lee with Liz Truss, where the former Prime Minister will escape the Westminster bubble to be quizzed live by you, our amazing GB News viewers.
We're getting out of Westminster. We're going to listen to what people are saying. Join us at 9 o'clock. We're on GB News, me and Dan Wootton. Look forward to seeing you then.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
At 4 o'clock, we will have the very best coverage of the biggest story in town, the Partygate report, Boris Johnson's dynamite response, and I'm going to tease you on this one, but I have got a big guest coming your way just after the 4 o'clock, so stay tuned. But I am sick of Just Stop Oil activists. I'm absolutely sick of them messing around with people's lives, and the emails and tweets that you send me show that you're sick of them as well. So I've managed to crowbar this in today against a lot of advice that we should just hammer Boris Johnson, but I was delighted to see today that the police are finally getting these menaces off the streets and down the nick. But guess what? They don't like it one bit. I present to you a lovely video of Poppy, who was detained this morning.
Today, because I'm absolutely terrified for my future, and I feel like I have no other choice but to stand up in civil resistance. I've been arrested under draconian laws that the government have put in place to try and quash our democratic right to protest. I don't want to be doing this, but I can't be a bystander and I can't do nothing while we hurtle towards climate destruction.
I sound like I'm crying, but I'm not actually crying. Good grief. The most surprising thing about that is that Poppy's actually got a job. Apparently she works in a cafe in Bury St Edmunds, so the future's bright, Poppy. You crack on. Although, does she now that she may well have a criminal record? I mean, we'll have to wait and see, won't we? But there we go. I mean, seriously, look at the fear, the manufactured fear that is on those people's faces. Now, either it's real, in which case I feel desperately sorry for them. I speak to Just Stop Oil clowns regularly who tell me that they've decided that they're not going to have kids. I mean, my initial reaction, of course, is, was that your choice or not? But when you think about it, how bleak is it that a load of people now feel as though, because of all this climate fear-mongering, that there is no need or no desire, in fact, it would be cruel to sire another generation. You don't want to bring another generation into this world. I can't help but feel as though those people are sadly being used. We've got some images, though, I believe, from some protests in London, I think, that took place earlier on as well. Just Stop Oil, they're back at it again. There they are, aren't they? Yes, OK. Oh, gosh. Isn't it amazing? Because today's Thursday, isn't it? Which is a working day, isn't it? It's Thursday. It's the day where most people should be at work. Someone trying to get to work there. And interesting, isn't it, that Just Stop Oil appear to be more or less all white, middle class, either retired or don't have many career prospects to begin with. So there you go. Anyway, I just thought I'd bring you up to date with some crying idiot from Just Stop Oil. Now, there's less than 2 weeks to go until I dance on stage with the Dream Boys, who are a group of male strippers. That's right, less than 2 weeks. I'm going to have to do 3 routines on the night. One of them is a solo. Look at that fine figure of a man there. And the Dream Boy. Anyway, I met the lads a few weeks ago to learn the moves. I'm going to be strutting my stuff in Bromley in Kent on Wednesday, June the 28th. But our viewers obviously can see some of the men. So these are the Dream Boys. There they are. Yes. So I'm going to be doing stuff like this. Now, I want to make it very clear that I am not doing this for fun. It is utterly humiliating. I have got a body like a blancmange and I can't dance. So, yeah. But I'm doing it to raise money for the mental health charity Mind. And I'm delighted to say that you've raised nearly 57.5 grand. So thank you to everyone who has given money so far. I'm going to read out the link to you now. It's justgiving.com/fundraising/challenge Christys. Serious note on this, very serious note. Every single day in the UK, 12 men take their own lives. Suicide is the single biggest killer of men under the age of 40, and a lot of people, unfortunately, struggle to access NHS care at the time they need it, and that's where charities like Mind come in. Justgiving.com/fundraising/challenge Christys. We're at 57.5 grand, OK? If we get to 60 grand by end of play on this show tomorrow, I will wax my chest for when I go on stage for the Dream Boys, and I will film it. And you can... So even if you hate me, which I know that lots of you do, and you think, just give me the money so that you see me undergo extreme physical pain, OK? Justgiving.com/fundraising/challenge Christys. If you hit 60k by tomorrow at 6 p.m, I'm getting waxed. Right. There we go. OK, loads more to come now. I have got a heavy-hitting second hour of this show for you. Yes, we've got all of the Boris stuff, but we've got Colin Pitchfork, this double rapist child killer who was given parole not so long ago, had to be recalled for parole for breaking his bail conditions, has now been scheduled for parole again. Absolute madness. I'll tell you what else is madness. A Sudanese asylum seeker, refugee, was granted leave to remain in this country whilst he was up for a rape charge, which he has now been found guilty of at a university. I will have all of that and much, much more, as well as, of course, the big story of the day, which is Boris Johnson, the Privileges Committee, and, crucially, his reaction to it. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
And action.
Sergeant, the big green, my superstar panel that already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 4 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, and Boris Johnson says that he is the victim of a politically motivated kangaroo court stitch-up as the Privilege Committee publishes its findings. The only person who would have been suspended for longer than Boris Johnson would have been Keith Vaz, and we all know what he did. I'm also going to be talking about this, though. What next for Boris Johnson? Is he going to go and make life tough for the Tory party? Will he join forces with Nigel Farage? Will he join forces with Lawrence Fox? Who knows? We'll try and find Boris a home. But I'm also going to be talking about this story, and this absolutely infuriates me. Colin Pitchfork, double child murderer and rapist, was allowed out on parole. Much controversy about that at the time. He was recalled, wasn't he, back to prison, I'm sure we all remember, because he was approaching women in a park. Well, now the parole board have decided that he should be released again. What on earth is going on? I'm going to be talking about that. I'm also going to be talking about this, another story that winds me right up, and no doubt you as well. A Sudanese refugee was granted leave to remain in this country whilst on a rape charge, which he has now been found guilty of. Yeah, he had another conviction as well. We are such a soft touch. Patrick Christys on GB News. GB Views at gbnews.com. What next with Boris Johnson? Do you think it was a witch hunt and a stitch-up? And get those emails coming in about all the topics I'm talking about there. Colin Pitchfork as well. Can you believe that that guy might be back out on the street soon? But now, here's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon. The top stories this hour. As you've been hearing, Boris Johnson has rejected the findings of the inquiry looking into Partygate, which has reported that he deliberately misled Parliament. The report said the former Prime Minister was guilty of serious contempt and was complicit in a campaign attempting to abuse and intimidate the committee. Mr Johnson describes the findings as deranged and accused the inquiry itself of hypocrisy. The former Prime Minister would have faced a recommended suspension of 90 days had he not quit as an MP. Well, MPs will now debate the Privileges Committee report into Boris Johnson's conduct. The Deputy Labour leader, Angela Rayner, says he should never have been Prime Minister.
Well, I think the Privileges Committee is pretty damning. You know, it's serious. Boris Johnson is not only a lawbreaker but a liar. He's not fit for public office and he's disgraced himself and continues to act like a, pound-shot Trump in the way in which he tries to discredit anybody who criticises his actions when actually a decent public servant would have done the honourable thing, would have had a little bit of humility and would have apologised to the British public for what they put them through.
Well, that's Labour's view. Liberal Democrats Deputy Leader Daisy Cooper believes Boris Johnson's political career is now over.
What we've seen today is absolutely extraordinary. Quite frankly, it should be the final nail in the coffin of Boris Johnson's political career. I think people here in Mid-Beds and around the country want Rishi Sunak to step up and confirm that he will never, ever allow Boris Johnson to stand as a candidate ever again.
Well, let's hear what constituents have to say.
He did an excellent job in a difficult situation, so I don't see how they can down him now for what he made a mistake. So did hundreds of others. They don't get followed up.
He's the kind of guy that if you were having a party, you'd want him to come. He's a nice, fun guy, but as leader of the country, no.
Under the circumstances, yes, things, could have been different, but still nobody else could have done it. He got the job done.
Well, in the last half hour, it's been confirmed that by-elections in Uxbridge and South Ruislip and Selby and Ainsty for Boris Johnson and Nigel Adams, respectively, will be held on July the 20th. Now, let's turn our attentions to news from Nottingham, where detectives have been given a further 36 hours to question the man suspected of murdering 3 people in the city, and they've confirmed the suspect was a former student of the university. A vigil and a minute's silence will be held this afternoon honouring Grace O'Malley-Kumar, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates. Their families, friends and thousands of students gathered yesterday in the grounds of the university. The Home Secretary has laid flowers outside Nottingham Council House in Market Square ahead of the vigil at 5:30 this evening, and a minute's silence will be held at 6 o'clock. Now, the mother of a 9-year-old boy who suffered more than 50 injuries to his body has been jailed over his death. Carla Scott was sentenced to 27 years for child cruelty and the manslaughter of her son, Alfie Steele, at their home in Droitwich in Worcestershire. Her partner, Dirk Howell, has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 32 years to serve for his murder. Outside Court Detective Chief Inspector Leighton Harding said justice had been served.
At no stage has either Scott or Howell shown any sign of remorse or acceptance of responsibility for their actions. The custodial sentences passed on Howell and Scott are a clear reflection of the abhorrent physical and emotional abuse they both inflicted upon Alfie. And while I recognise that no sentence will ever undo the dreadful abuse that Alfie suffered, it does mean that Scott and Howell will now face the consequences of their sickening actions.
Meanwhile, a double-child killer has been granted parole and will be released from prison subject to conditions. Colin Pitchfork was jailed for life in 1998 for murdering 2 teenagers. He strangled Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth, who were both 15, in Leicestershire in 1983 and 1986. The Ministry of Justice says the decision will be very upsetting for their families. It plans to ask the Parole Board to reconsider its decision. And lastly, tributes have been pouring in for the double Oscar-winning actress and former Labour MP Glenda Jackson, who's died at the age of 87. She died peacefully this morning at her London home with her family by her side. She gave up acting to join the House of Commons as an MP in North London from 1992 to 2015. Sir Keir Starmer says Miss Jackson leaves a space in our cultural and political life that can never be filled. Glenda Jackson, who died this morning. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Back now to Patrick.
More on the Boris Johnson stuff in a minute, but what the heck is going on? Double child rapist and murderer Colin Pitchfork is going to be released from prison again. Are the parole board mental? This guy raped and killed 2 kids. He was released in 2021 and then recalled to prison after he was understood to have approached young women on multiple occasions while out on walks from the bail hostel where he was living. The parole board have said that they've done a risk assessment and it's all OK. Have they been smoking something? Let me read you their decision statement, OK? The prisoner had committed shocking, serious offences causing immeasurable harm to his victims. He killed anyway. However, the parole board's role, as required by law, is to undertake a risk assessment. The panel noted that Mr Pitchfork has been in prison for a very long time. His behaviour for almost all of that time has not caused any concern. He's made constructive use of his time and is now 63 years old, and in general, age tends to reduce risk. Mr Pitchfork has completed many courses satisfactorily, and the evidence before the panel demonstrated that he had learned the lessons that he had been taught and had worked out how to apply them in practice. Accordingly, the panel determined that it was no longer necessary for the protection of the public for Mr Pitchfork to remain confined, and thereby directed his release. I want to meet the people who made this decision and look them all in the eye and ask them this question. Would you leave Colin Pitchfork in a room alone with your daughter? If the answer to that question is no, then why on earth are you releasing this monster back into the wild? This is an absolute insult to the families of the 15-year-old girls that he raped and murdered. It's also an insult to the public. It's a bloody disgrace, actually. This guy should be breathing no oxygen at all, let alone the oxygen floating freely outside the prison walls. I'm going to be returning to that story a little bit later in this hour, but I did it then because I want your views so that I can read them out a little bit later on. gbviews@gbnews.com. But back to the big matter in hand, in a way, which is our top story on Boris Johnson, isn't it? Now, he's branded the first Prime Minister, he has been the first Prime Minister to have lied to the House of Commons by an explosive report into Partygate. The Privileges Committee says that he deliberately misled MPs before being complicit in a campaign of abuse and intimidation. But Johnson has hit back, calling the findings of the report tripe and completely deranged. Well, the committee found that Boris Johnson deliberately misled the House, recommended a 90-day suspension from the Commons, which would have triggered a by-election if Johnson hadn't resigned as an MP. The committee said Johnson shouldn't be granted a former member's pass. It found there had been a deliberate attack on democratic institutions, and it also said Johnson had what it called conveniently been flexible with his interpretation of the rules on gatherings. But there is more to this than meets the eye, in my view, and GB News' Deputy Political Editor Tom Harwood joins me in the studio. Tom, deliberately misleading the House, all of that stuff that we've got there. This is more about them and less about Boris Johnson. Is it a complete and utter witch hunt and a stitch-up?
Boris Johnson certainly thinks so, but of course there are many, many others who would disagree and say that this was a legitimate committee of Parliament, and it's been mentioned many, many times that of the 7 individuals who sit on this committee, 4 of them are Conservative MPs. What Boris Johnson points to, however, is that of those 4 Conservative MPs, at least 2 of them have what he at least thinks are personal vendettas against him as an individual. And that leads to what has been described by supporters of Boris Johnson as a sort of kangaroo court, a court that has a prejudicial idea before it gets into examining the situation before it. And they do have some evidence to suggest that that's the case, predominantly the fact that Harriet Harman, who is the new chair of this committee for this investigation had previously tweeted, not only did Boris Johnson break rules, but he lied to Parliament about it. The chair of the committee, in other words, had a view.
But why was she not made to step aside? Well, how on earth can that be the case?
That's a big, big question that Boris Johnson's supporters have put forward. However, I suppose those on the side of the committee would say, this is a committee of politicians. They're always going to have some sort of view. And perhaps that's a problem with the structure of this.
Oh, don't worry, the committee of politicians is here. Everything will be fine.
But it is extraordinary because there are lots of investigations like this that happen all the time. Usually a lot less media attention put upon them. But this is extraordinary because a 90-day suspension is the longest suspension but one that this committee has decreed since the Second World War. That's over 70 years of varying levels of suspension from the House, but 90 days is the second longest ever in that time period. That's an extraordinary punishment, especially when we look at some comparable suspensions. For example, Margaret Ferrier, the former SNP MP who ferried COVID to and from the country, she took a test.
She went on an international COVID tour, some would say.
She took a test for COVID and then went to do some shopping. She had a massage. She went to the gym. She had a
massage.
She went to the House of Commons.
Well, we're going to have to stop you there. Did she eat any cake at her desk on her birthday, Tom?
She didn't eat cake.
Well, you know, that's it then, isn't it?
Case closed. But she was recommended a suspension of 30 days.
Right.
1/3 the length that Boris Johnson was recommended.
Right.
Now, the committee clearly say that this has been exacerbated because of how he spoke about the committee. He referred to them as a kangaroo court. They say he has been complicit in sort of a campaign against some of the members. And to be fair, we have seen some stories in the media in the last few days that Boris Johnson has certainly responded to. For example, that of Bernard Jenkin, a man with no love lost for Boris Johnson, who has been accused of attending his own lockdown-breaching party in December 2020.
OK, look, Tom, thank you very, very much. That's Tom Harwood, our Deputy Political Editor, picking through the start of this. Going to ask you to sit there, Tom, just in case we have to come back to you in a moment, if that's all right. But joining me now is the Chief Political Editor at the Financial Times. It's Jim Pickard. Jim, thank you very much, I believe, joins me now. And Jim, what's your overall verdict on this report? Then Boris Johnson is clearly very, very angry. I think mainly because, well, the allegations of political bias, but also that the Met Police didn't think that he'd done wrong in a lot of the circumstances, but the committee clearly did. And I think people find that difficult to get their heads around, how the committee can carry more weight than the Met.
So there's been a lot of talk about kangaroo courts, and there's been a lot of talk about how this was only a piece of cake and that kind of thing. I think what your viewers need to remember is that the period in question was a period of almost unprecedented state control lockdowns where people couldn't go out of their home, they could exercise once a day. There were people who were having funerals of their relatives that they couldn't attend. There were people who literally were burying their grandparents and the family or their partner or their parents or their child, and their family couldn't come. So the point the committee makes is that this is a point of huge gravity for the United Kingdom. And the reason, or one of the reasons why they've sanctioned the former Prime Minister so heavily is because as the Prime Minister, he was the one most responsible for setting standards. Now, one thing I would say here is that when the stories first broke in the media about this, Boris Johnson could have come clean and he could have said, you know what, maybe there were some parties happening here or there, I'm going to look into this, come clean. There was very much a policy of Downing Street at the time to shut the whole thing down and deny the whole thing. And as part of that campaign to deny what was actually had happened in Downing Street, Boris Johnson found himself
Can I just push back a little bit on that, Jim?
Further than he knew at the time. That there had been
I'm just going to push back a little bit on that, Jim.
For sure he knew about it or not.
Oh, yeah, because I do understand what you mean. Absolutely, people are fuming that they couldn't go to funerals, all of these things that you've just mentioned, 100%. But what Boris Johnson is saying is that Downing Street was a 24/7 epicentre of dealing with lockdowns, Christmas lockdowns, the latest COVID analysis, and a potential no-deal Brexit as well. And that involved people being there 24/7, working around the clock. And sometimes one or two of them might have a little bit of a drink while they're at work. I can understand that.
There's a difference between having a drink at your desk and having parties that were so robust that red wine was spilled up the wall, a swing was broken, cleaners were insulted. A lot of these parties that were going on, and I hasten to add, Boris Johnson did not attend those particular parties.
Yeah.
But the question is, why was he not aware of them? Why did he not do more to find out what had happened when he came out with these denials? So the point I was trying to make was that if Boris Johnson, when these stories first surfaced, had made an attempt to get to the bottom of what had happened under his own watch, I don't think we would have found ourselves in this pickle. This all begins with Johnson's furious denials. It then leads into him undermining the credibility of 7 members of the Privileges Committee, remember 4 of which were Conservative MPs, and him attacking their integrity, impugning parliamentary processes in the place behind me. And it's quite interesting that he would have got a 20-day suspension. The way the committee was going about a week ago, they were heading for a 20-day suspension. He's ended up with a 90-day suspension because of the ferocity with which he and his acolytes have undermined the committee. Now, you might still think that 20 days was too harsh. It is, of course, it would have been less than Ferrier, the SNP MP, who ludicrously took her COVID potentially all the way up to Scotland on a train. But I think, 20 days, the point that members of the committee have made to me is that he was the Prime Minister. You expect the Prime Minister to be held to the toughest of standards. He's not just some 2-bit, Shires.
Yeah, but what about the person who's chairing? What about the person who's chairing the committee? What about the person who's chairing the committee? Should they not be held to the highest of standards? What about the individual who's sitting to her right? Should they not be held to the highest of standards? And there are serious allegations of bias there, namely by virtue of what actually she tweeted. And then when it comes to Bernard Jenkins as well, serious allegations hanging over his head about some kind of boozy reception for his wife that, believe it or not, shock horror, Jim, may have involved cake if it all turns out to be true, and allegedly was in a much smaller room. So, I mean, this is what I'm saying. They're all hypocritical losers in a way, are they not?
I think Bernard Jenkins needs to be. I think someone somewhere in Parliament needs to work out whether Bernard Jenkins is a hypocrite and whether he also broke the law during that period. But I think the big difference is that the committee wasn't trying to find out who'd broken the law. We already know that because there've been over 100 fines issued by the police. We already know that. This was all about whether the Prime Minister of our great country lied to MPs, which you're not allowed to do if you are a minister, let alone Prime Minister. And Bernard Jenkins is not a minister, and he didn't claim in the House of Commons that he was unaware of and that there was no party.
Look, Jim, thank you. Thank you. I don't believe I've had you on the show before, but I would love to have you back on. I really appreciate your time. Thank you. It's Jim Pickard there, who is the Chief Political Editor at the Financial Times. And I'm just going to just run through a little bit with Tom Harwood here, who's still with me in the studio, because we are just waiting for Tangam Debonair, the Labour MP as well. Quite a big cheese in the Labour Party, it must be said. What do you make of what was said there? Because the line is there that they concluded that Boris Johnson misled Parliament. In order to do that, you have to enter into a man's head and prove that he was lying, which, by the letter of the law, is a very difficult thing to do.
It's an incredibly difficult thing to do, but Jim is absolutely right that the charge of lying before the House of Commons from a minister is a very serious charge. It's why, for example, there have been occasions at Prime Minister's questions where the Speaker has stood up, stopped the proceedings because an MP has accused a minister of lying and told that MP to withdraw that remark. MPs are allowed to say a lot in the House of Commons.
They are.
MPs are allowed to libel people in the House of Commons. They have what's known as parliamentary privilege. What they're not allowed to do is accuse another MP of lying because it's taken as such a serious charge, because it leads to committees like this and charges like this. So Jim is absolutely right that the charge of is incredibly serious. What is difficult to understand, however, is, as I think you were alluding to there, we spoke about those fines that the Metropolitan Police has already determined. Indeed, the Metropolitan Police determined that Boris Johnson broke the rules on one occasion that they assessed, indeed, exactly the same number of times that Rishi Sunak did,
yes,
Boris
exactly.
Johnson points to. But the committee determined that Boris Johnson has broken the rules in other events, these so-called farewell events that he attended, which were the committee determined to be not authorised as work events. That's not what the police found. The police found that Boris Johnson's attendance thanking his colleagues at work was legitimate under the rules. The committee and the police seem to have reached different conclusions on that crucial question. Look, and that shows the grey area here.
Look, loads of people hated Boris Johnson. A lot of people in the Labour Party despised him for a variety of different reasons, on a personal level, on his background level. Actually, I would argue some of that is actually quite prejudice, but there you go. And they saw him as a winner, and he was a massive threat to the Labour Party, as evidenced by the desecration that he did of Jeremy Corbyn. OK, and so when you look at the way that this was brought about initially, the way that things were leaked to the press, the complete and utter non-stop dripping out of information that was in the press that led to it. I mean, awards were won by people in the media for their work in terms of getting things out into the press on this. It was farmed out and farmed out and farmed out. Then when the Met Police said that they didn't want to investigate too much, there was even legal action taken against the Met to make them try to investigate even more of it. And now we end up with a situation where somebody who's called him a liar on Twitter is chairing a committee. I mean, yeah, all right, Boris Johnson is no saint, but I mean, you have to be able to question the validity of the report, eh?
You've summed up a huge series of events pretty well there, because, of course, it was the case that the Met Police said they didn't do retrospective investigations, and then suddenly they did under political pressure. There are all sorts of elements here where I think it is fair to say that there has been campaigning on this issue. Now, there's nothing wrong with campaigning journalism. I think it's a great thing. I think what does raise question marks is when journalists who are campaigning say that they're not. That's a bit duplicitous.
Good stuff, Tom. Thank you very much. Tom Harwood there, our Deputy Political Editor. Right, OK, now let's get more Labour reaction to the Partygate report. I am joined by the shadow leader of the House of Commons, Tangam Debonair. Tangam, thank you very much. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, I read something interesting that was attributed to you earlier today, which I hope is correct. You would quite like Boris Johnson to pay his own legal costs now, is that right?
Yes, I absolutely would. And what's more, I think it shows just how out of touch Rishi Sunak is, that he's allowed taxpayers' money, which is hundreds of thousands of pounds, to be paid for his legal fees. I want him to pay that back because it's the taxpayers' money. There's a cost of living crisis. There's any amount of things that money could be used for instead. Rishi Sunak, if he really wants to show that he's got good judgment, because at the moment I think he's got anything but, he should make sure that money is repaid, and he should also switch his focus back to the issues which really matter.
With respect, it was about stuff he did when he was Prime Minister. And can you really retrospectively...
It was stuff that he did,
Yeah, can you really retrospectively go and take someone for £250,000 or however much it costs? That's a bit rum, isn't it?
And the thing is that he didn't need to have his legal fees paid in the first place. We all know that Boris Johnson is earning any amount of money, not doing his job as an MP, but as a speaker around the world. Now, but that's not really the point. Rishi Sunak used taxpayers' money. It is precious. And Boris Johnson was appearing in front of a parliamentary committee, not a court of law. He was appearing because he was accused of breaking parliamentary rules, which were about lying to Parliament and, by extension, to us, the public. That's just not good enough that taxpayers' money was spent on that. We've also got the, frankly, rather murky situation where Rishi Sunak, our current Prime Minister, just didn't seem to be able to stand up to his predecessor and say, look, hang on a minute, your resignation honours list can wait until we've read the Privileges Committee report. Now, he didn't do that, with the result that some of Boris Johnson's cronies are now being rewarded for helping Boris Johnson to try and cover up what were obviously, we now see, lies. That's just not good enough. It's debasing the whole system of honours.
Do you respect the Met Police?
Well, of course, yes.
But why don't you believe them then when they say that Boris Johnson only did one thing that was against the rules and the lockdown?
But this isn't about whether the report wasn't about whether or not Boris Johnson broke the rules. It was about whether he lied to Parliament. Telling lies is wrong. Telling lies to Parliament.
But if he was found by the Met Police to have not broken rules, then he wasn't standing up and lying about it, was he?
But he was found to have broken the rules. He was found by the Sue Gray inquiry, which he himself commissioned, to have broken the rules, and he was found by the Met Police to have broken the rules. But the issue here is that he lied to us about that. He said that no rules were broken. They were. He said that he didn't know about any rules being broken. He clearly did. And then we all make mistakes. He had the opportunity to correct the record. That's important because we all have to have the opportunity to correct our mistakes, and he repeatedly refused to do so. That's what this inquiry was about. I respect the fact that very experienced parliamentarians, a cross-party committee with a majority of Tory MPs, was asked unanimously by Parliament to do this by Boris Johnson. He knew what the rules were when he went into it. Now he's got a result he doesn't like. He's having a massive strop.
The Met Police found that Keir Starmer had done nothing wrong over the old beer and korma situation in Durham, and that's fair enough. If an inquiry is launched into that, and some of your colleagues determine that actually he did behave incorrectly there and that he lied about not behaving incorrectly there, presumably you would call for him to go and pay his own legal fees as well, would you?
The Durham police found that Keir Starmer hadn't broken rules, and he hadn't. Therefore, he hadn't lied. Now, right, the Met Police did find that Boris Johnson broke the rules, but we all know he knew what the rules were. We saw him in number 10 Downing Street night after night telling us what the rules were. So the fact that the evidence of our own eyes is there for all to see, with pictures of events that took place at number 10 Downing Street, including some where he was present. That's what the issue is, because when he then came to Parliament and said that no rules had been broken and no events had taken place, he clearly knew that that wasn't true. Now, he could have come and apologised, corrected the record. MPs sometimes have to do that. But he was the Prime Minister. He told us what the rules were. He broke the rules. And what this inquiry showed today is that he knew that when he told us that no rules were broken. That's a lie. It's not good enough.
Bit of it,
the reason we have those rules is because it's important people tell the truth.
Just tell me the bit of the report that proves that he lied.
Well, because we know that he told us what the rules were. OK, because we saw that for ourselves, and the report reminds us of that. We know that events took place because, again, there is evidence presented, not just in this report, but in the previous ones by the Met Police and by the Sue Gray inquiry, and because they took evidence both from Boris Johnson, he acknowledged some of the errors himself and did not correct them, and because the inquiry looked at what he'd said in Parliament and measured that against what they know, what we know, and he knows, and he acknowledged that he knew. Now, measuring what he said against what he acknowledged that he knew, we find a gap, and that means that he lied. But again, he could have done that and not done it intentionally, but he did do it and then didn't correct the record, and that really matters.
Should Harriet Harman have been anywhere near this inquiry, do you think?
Does Harriet Harman what, sorry?
Should she have been anywhere near this inquiry?
Harriet Harman is a highly experienced lawyer. She is Mother of the House, but more importantly, the House of Commons voted for her to chair this inquiry. Nobody, including Boris Johnson, voted against her.
The public voted for Boris Johnson, though, didn't they?
It's gone on now. And they can look at the evidence, as everybody now can, and judge for themselves. And actually, Parliament will make the decision eventually, Patrick. That will take place on Monday. We will have a debate. I will be speaking. Others will speak. And then we will vote. And it will be a free vote, because it's what's called House business. It's to do with Parliament. Parliament will decide if we endorse the report or not.
All right. So, Tangam, thank you. I do always really enjoy our back and forth, so I do appreciate you coming on and making the time for it.
Me too, Patrick. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, all right.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll just find a happy topic next time. Tangam Debonair, who is the shadow leader of the House of Commons, but there we go. All right, well, look, we'll be bringing you more on this big news story as well throughout the course of this show. Excuse me. And you can get loads more right on our website right now. It's gbnews.com. It's the fastest growing national news website in the country, and it's got the best analysis and opinion, as well as the latest breaking news. But more now on this big story that I spoke to you about at the top of the hour. And it is that the parole board say that double child killer Colin Pitchfork can be released from prison subject to conditions. Pitchfork was jailed for life in 1988 after raping and strangling two 15-year-old girls in Leicestershire in the 80s. He was released in September 2021, but was back behind bars just 2 months later after breaching those licence conditions. And now, apparently, he's going to be back out again. To, I think, help us understand this, I'm joined now by barrister Chris Dorr, KC, I believe, as well. I think I might have just demoted you there. KC, Chris Dorr. Chris, is this safe, really, that we've got this guy back out?
Well, that's for the parole board to judge. That's exactly what the parole board's job is to decide, where the parole board have a look at all of the evidence. They look at his behaviour in prison. They look at psychiatric reports, psychological evaluations. They look at all of the training courses and rehabilitation programmes he's been on over the past 35 years or so. And they make a judgment as to whether he represents an ongoing risk to the public.
I think that's the issue, though. Yeah, is that not kind of the issue, though, really, which is that I don't understand how on earth they have reached this judgment. I've read their review, and, I mean, this guy was allowed... I mean, what he did initially, you could argue, you know, for a whole host of different punishments. We won't go down that route again, Chris. But being allowed out and then recalled for, you know, approaching women in a public place and things like this. I mean, should the parole board not ask themselves the question, would you let this guy in a room alone with your young daughter? And if the answer to that is no, then you shouldn't let him out.
Well, I suspect, I don't know for sure, but I suspect that's one of the conditions of his parole, that he's not allowed to be alone with young children.
Yeah, but why will he be allowed out at all? I mean, why should anyone like this be allowed out after they've already breached? Is it not an insult to the families of the 15-year-old girls that he raped and killed?
Well, you could make that argument for anyone who's released from prison who assaulted, murdered or attacked or raped anyone, that it's an insult to the victim or the victim's families if the perpetrator is released. And then if you follow the logic through, no one would ever be released for any of those crimes. And of course, some people may think that's a good thing, and we should have another 500,000 prison places to make room for them all. And that's a legitimate public debate. But as far as this is concerned, the parole board, which is subject, by the way, to an appeal mechanism whereby a judge can review its decision in full and can decide to overrule the decision. And then ultimately, if people are not even satisfied with that outcome, they can be taken to the courts, and judicial review proceedings can keep him in prison until there's been a decision, and if necessary, up to the very highest courts in the land. So there are processes.
Are there not some actions that should outweigh whether or not you've done some academic courses in university, whether or not you're now of an age where you're deemed to be less of a threat, whether or not that you talk a good game in front of a parole board? Some people would argue that raping and killing 2 teenage girls and then also breaking bail conditions on the single opportunity that you had out of prison just a couple of years ago would probably put a big rejected stamp on any future parole decisions.
Well, there's 2 separate issues there, aren't there? As I said earlier, if people believe that these sorts of offences deserve a whole life sentence, then that's an argument that has to be made. Of course, you can't increase the sentence retrospectively. We don't allow sentences to be increased after the event in this country. So that would be an argument about future double murderers or double child rapists. But at the moment, the law is that he was entitled to apply for parole, I think about 6 or 7 years ago, and he's clearly went way past that minimum amount of time he's had to spend in prison. And the short answer to your question is either we have a parole board that we entrust to make decisions about risk, or we don't. And if we do, then we have to let the parole board do its job, subject to all those checks and balances. If we don't believe the parole board is competent to do its job, we need to get a new body or a new way of measuring risk, because you have to measure risk somehow, because that's how parole decisions are made.
Yeah, look, Chris, thank you. Great stuff. It's Chris Daw there, KC. And Chris makes absolutely perfect points. In a sense, you might not necessarily like what he's saying, but you either have to scrap the parole board and come up with a new system that's in place, or find better people for it, really, or change the law. If you don't want monsters like Colin Pitchfork to be given parole, not once, but twice. I tell you what, I mean, can you imagine the idea of finding out that your new next-door neighbour is Colin Pitchfork? I just refuse to believe that people on the parole board would be happy for a man like Colin to be alone with their kids. And if the answer to that question is no, I wouldn't, then why on earth do you have to inflict him on the rest of us? But there we go. There's more between now and 5 o'clock. I will bring you the shocking story of the Sudanese refugee convicted of rape. Would you believe he'd already been charged when he was granted his final leave to remain in this country? And with Boris Johnson no longer a Tory MP, I'm going to try and find Boris a new political party. And if you want to see me go through the pain of... This is a shift in tone, isn't it? If you want to see me go through the pain of having my chest waxed, I've got news for you. Oh, grief, I've just seen what's happened. OK, right, stay tuned to find out. Now there's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories this hour. Boris Johnson has rejected the findings of the partygate inquiry, which says he deliberately misled Parliament. The report blames the former Prime Minister for serious contempt, saying he was complicit in the attempted abuse and intimidation of the committee itself. Mr Johnson describes the findings as a deranged conclusion and accused the inquiry of hypocrisy. The former Prime Minister would have faced a recommended suspension of 90 days had he not quit as an MP. Well, MPs will now debate the Privileges Committee report into his conduct on Monday. In Nottingham, detectives have been given a further 36 hours to question the man suspected of murdering 3 people in the city, and they've confirmed he was a former student of the university. People will begin to gather in Nottingham city centre in just over an hour's time. A minute's silence will be held at 6 this evening as a mark of respect for the 3 people killed on Tuesday. First-year students Grace O'Malley Kumar, Barnaby Webber and local school caretaker Ian Coates. The Home Secretary laid flowers outside Nottingham Council House today. 2 other Britons who died after a dive boat caught fire off the Egyptian coast have been named. Stephen Hill and Paul Darling were both taking part in scuba diving lessons when the vessel burst into flames on Sunday. 58-year-old Christina Quinn, who was a chief executive at a hospice in Plymouth, was also killed in the fire. And as you've been hearing, the double child killer Colin Pitchfork has been granted parole and will be released from prison subject to conditions. Pitchfork was jailed for life for strangling Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth in Leicestershire in 1983 and 1986. They were 15 years old. The Ministry of Justice says it'll ask the Parole Board to reconsider its decision. You can get more on all those stories by heading to our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Quick snapshot of the markets for you. The pound buying you $2,741 and €1.1668. The price of gold, £1,532 and 75 pence an ounce. The FTSE 100 at 7,627 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Right, more on Boris Johnson. And while today's Privileges Committee report would spell the end for most politicians' careers, that's, I suspect, not going to be the end of Boris Johnson. So he's quit as a Tory MP. It got me thinking, can we find him a new party? Look, I'm joined now by Andrew Bridgen, who was a Conservative MP initially, but is now a member of the Reclaim Party. There's quite a lot I want to talk to Andrew about in relation to how he feels about Boris Johnson. Look, Andrew, I will start you off by asking whether or not you think that Boris Johnson's got any place in the Reclaim Party.
No. That's very unequivocal. I think the Privileges Committee have clearly come to the right conclusion that Boris Johnson knowingly misled Parliament about the parties and not socially distancing and not wearing masks. But I think that the Privileges Committee and the mainstream media have completely missed the main point, which is that everyone at Number 10 knew all the science about COVID-19 and they clearly weren't worried about it at all. But they indulged in, as Matt Hancock would say, scaring the pants off the public, and that's, for me, that's the real sin.
So for you, Andrew, the real story here is that when you kind of cut through all of the noise on Partygate and all of that stuff, for you, the real story is that we have people who were making rules and inflicting rules on us who didn't think that those rules were going to make a blind bit of difference, yet continued to do it anyway.
Patrick, I met all the cameramen who filmed the daily press conferences in Number 10. I met them a year ago, and they all told me that there was only the cameraman allowed into Number 10 because of all the restrictions, and so they had to do the sound, the camera, everything. And in front of the camera, everything was spaced out, and everyone was socially distanced. But if they'd swung the camera 180 degrees at every one of those press conferences, there were dozens and dozens of spads standing right behind the camera with no masks, no social distancing, and they told me it was a complete pantomime.
Okay, and so for you, it's not really just about whether or not... You're not actually that bothered, really, are you, about whether or not Boris misled Parliament? Are you more bothered about maybe... or are you more bothered about the nation being misled? Is that what it is, really?
Well, he misled Parliament, but he also misled the nation over how dangerous COVID-19 was, because clearly everyone at Number 10 knew all the science. They had all the latest briefings. They didn't bother social distancing or masking. They were worried that they were going to go home and kill their granny. And that's the real story, but no one's going to write it, Patrick.
OK, all right. Look, what next for Boris Johnson for you here now? I mean, you know, he's saying it's this big witch hunt. He's saying that, you know, there's a politically motivated attack on him. The committee has said he's an absolute liar and, you know, essentially should never work again, pretty much. What do you think will end up happening with Boris?
Well, the committee, because he's resigned from Parliament, the only punishment they can give him is not to allow him a former member's pass. That's happened with John Bercow and Keith Vaz, as I recall. He's in illustrious company there. But, I mean, if Boris were to stand at the next election and win a seat, that 90-day suspension would not be held.
Okay.
I think if he were to win a by-election in this Parliament, I think it probably would. But if there were a general election, it would fall.
OK, all right. And just because I know, look, very different circumstances, but you were getting a lot of pushback on, you know, yourself, and you kind of know what it's like to have the tide turn against you, to be fair, Andrew. Do you have any sympathy for Boris Johnson whatsoever, given that there was a concerted media campaign, there was then this committee, there's been, you know, a huge amount of pressure on the Met Police to go after him? All of this, I mean, have you, and now also the attempt to make him pay his own legal fees. All right, I imagine he's got a bit of money, so I don't think that would hit him as hard as it would hit me, for example. But there's also the desire to remove his member's pass and to completely ruin him, basically. Do you have any sympathy for that?
No, I don't think anyone's going to ruin Boris Johnson. He is, whatever you think of him, he's a great showman, and he will have a very profitable, lucrative future on the speaking circuit around the world. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. What I feel sorry for all businesses that were shut down, the lockdowns unnecessarily, and the 300% plus increase in suicides during the lockdowns in northwest Leicestershire. Those people are not just collateral damage for driving compliance with wrong-headed government policy put through by Boris Johnson.
And what is fascinating there, Andrew, which is if we took your argument to its natural conclusion, and this is just Andrew Bridgen's view, which is if they didn't think that the measures were going to have a huge amount of impact when it came to tackling the coronavirus, they made everybody comply with those measures, but then they didn't comply with them themselves. The irony is that it is those measures and a non-compliance with them that have brought Boris down.
Yes, but look where we are because of those lockdowns. You know, with the national debt's at record levels, and after 13 years of a Conservative government, we've got taxes at the highest level they've been in my lifetime. That is a damning indictment.
Andrew, thank you very much.
All down to the measures that were taken over COVID-19.
OK, Andrew, thank you very much for your time. I do really appreciate it. It's Andrew Bridgen there, who was the Conservative MP, but is now a member of the Reclaim Party in North West Leicestershire. Right, OK, so a bit of a shift this now in the next segment of this show. A Sudanese refugee has been convicted of rape. But get this, he was given the right to live permanently in the UK after he'd been charged. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prisons. I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan Tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, I'm taking the show on the road. We'll be live in Lee with Liz Truss, where the former Prime Minister will escape the Westminster bubble to be quizzed live by you, our amazing GB News viewers.
We're getting out of Westminster. We're going to listen to what people are saying. Join us at 9 o'clock. We're on GB News, me and Dan Wootton. Look forward to seeing you then.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now to this shocking story of the Sudanese refugee who's been convicted of rape. Adam Mohammed was found guilty of attacking a University of Exeter student in 2021. Incredibly, he was given final leave to remain in Britain last year by the Home Office, even though he'd already been charged with rape. I'm joined now by GB News contributor, occasional presenter and former Brexit Party MEP as well, Martin Daubney. Martin, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. This is madness, isn't it?
Yeah, the tawdry case of Adam Mohammed, Patrick, exemplifies everything that's wrong with our broken asylum system, the Home Office, and indeed our criminal justice system. To understand that, we need to go back in time. He was invited here he was invited by our government as a child, aged 16, in 2016. And he was resettled. 2 things then happened. First of all, the rape case took place in March 2021. And then in January 2022, he was also found guilty of battery. He was convicted outside a nightclub in Exeter. And then, as you said, in the interim period, he pleaded not guilty to the rape. He went to trial and his asylum was granted by the Home Office. Now, in what world is somebody awaiting rape granted asylum? As the prison sentence for rape is typically 4 years plus, he would definitely have fulfilled the criteria under the UK Borders Act 2007, and that is if you are put in prison for more than 12 months, then you can be deported. So any rational system would have pressed the pause button at this point, Patrick, and said, well, why don't we wait to look at this guy's permanent right to stay until after the court case? That didn't happen. And as a consequence, now we have a man who hasn't been jailed yet, but the judge has said he certainly will be, and we will never be able to get him out of the country. When you look at the numbers of Sudanese who are actually deported, it's one of the lowest of all nationalities because of the country's civil war. So Mr. Mohammed will be our baggage forever. And when you think his sentence will be insignificant in comparison with the fact that for a woman, or for anybody who's the victim of rape, they suffer a life sentence. And Patrick, I think we need to have a serious conversation after events in Nottingham this week, and also in Annecy in France. We saw the asylum seeker go on a rampage in a playground. We have to have a serious conversation about the cultural values of people who are coming into our country. Are they compatible with our own? Sudan is a country famed for its absolute lack of rights for women, a misogynistic culture, a patriarchy. And we have a situation here where we now have Mr. Mohammed, perhaps forever. And I think it makes people ask the big question, who does the Home Office actually stick up for? Are they on our side? Are they on the criminals' side? And many, many people today, Patrick, will be feeling severely let down once again by this broken system.
At some point, Martin, someone, presumably in the Home Office, was looking at this chap's case and they said, well, you've come from Sudan, you claim to be 16 years old, you've travelled through Libya, Italy and France. We have then decided out of the goodness of our heart to resettle you under a scheme for refugees. I mean, to be honest with you, it's bonkers because it's not as if we're not already taking enough people over the channel, but there we go. And then you are then wanted, or you've been charged with rape, and we'll still let you stay. And at some point, someone's made that decision. I mean, I want to meet that person.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would want to meet them, Patrick, ideally on their own in a room for 5 minutes, that kind of thing. It makes people absolutely exasperated, this. And I think we have every right, as taxpayers who will now put this guy, he'll be at our bill. We have every right to query this system and to ask big questions about what's going on. You're absolutely right. This guy now is our problem forever. His cultural values are incompatible with our own. He cannot be deported. And once again, we have to ask the question, perhaps they knew he couldn't be deported because, of course, the Equality and Human Rights Commission would always take his side. Look at the political class we have. MPs queuing up to stop the deportation of 43 violent criminals back to Jamaica, one of whom was freed and went on to stab somebody to death with a knife, murdered. And so we cannot get rid of these people with the ECHR, with the political class we have, and they seem to get preferential treatment by the Home Office. It just seems we have a system that takes the side of the criminals and not of British citizens, and certainly not of victims of horrible crimes such as rape.
The reality at the moment is, if you happen to come from a country that is a mess, right, you basically can come to Britain and know that we won't be able to deport you because we won't send you back to a mess, even if you have been charged with the rape of an unconscious university girl in this country.
Yeah, we have an immigration system, an asylum system, a political class, and dare I say it, a mainstream media class who are very supportive of the refugees welcome concept, the kind of Linacreites, if you like, who have this bizarre notion, this erroneous and factually incorrect notion that these people are capable of committing no wrongs. And the case of Adam Mohammed sorely underlines the fact that that's misguided at best and very, very dangerous at worst.
Look, Martin, thank you very much. Always very grateful for your time and for bringing stories like this to our attention as well here on this show. Martin Daubney there, former Brexit Party MEP, GBNews contributor, fan favourite as well. Now, time for a gear shift. It's been quite heavy duty this hour, all right? So we're gonna change the tone, people. An hour ago, my Just Giving fund page for the mental health charity Mind stood at just below £57,500. I said that if that figure got to £60,000 by, can I also just add 6 p.m. tomorrow, I said this, I will have my chest waxed on camera ahead of my appearance on stage with the Dream Boys, who are a group of male strippers. Now, I can confirm that you really want me to have my chest waxed. That figure now stands at almost £62,000. David, whose surname I will not read out, but I know who it is, donated £1,000, all right, and said, I think your Mrs. Emily should do the waxing. Enjoy, Emily. David, I will find out where you live, mate. It's all for a good cause and stuff, but I thank you, of course, thank you. But now I'm going to have to get my chest waxed. I should have set the bar higher, shouldn't I? I should have set the bar higher. But look, this donation is for a very, very good cause because mental health in this country is a massive issue. It's a proper pandemic. We've got 12 men a day taking their own lives. It's the biggest killer of men under the age of 40. This is just men that we're talking about here. Mental health crisis post-lockdown, and unfortunately the NHS is often overwhelmed, although you should try to get help there first. Charities like Mind come in, they save lives. 62 grand will save lives. You will save lives. JustGiving.com/fundraising/challenge Christys. Please give what you can, and I'll be getting my kit off in June, 2 weeks' time, just to humiliate myself for your own personal enjoyment. Anyway, moving on, sorry. Partygate report says Boris Johnson live. We all know the drill. I'll be talking about that in the next hour. He thinks it's tripe. To be honest, so do I. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 5 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, and we are going in on Boris Johnson accusing the Privileges Committee of it being a premeditated witch hunt. Well, I also want to know whether or not we have just biffed the best Prime Minister that we ever had. I want to hear from you on that. We're going to be having a big debate on the Privileges Committee on whether or not it was a stitch-up, a witch hunt, or whether or not Boris was indeed the best we've ever had. Of course, it isn't just the political stories that are in town today as well. We're going to be talking about a whole host of other deeply controversial topics, such as the release of Colin Pitchfork again, and indeed the Sudanese rapist who actually went on to rape an individual after being granted asylum in this country. So we're going to be talking about all of those stories right here in the next hour. Patrick Christys on GB News. Well, GB Views at gbnews.com. We're going to be getting stuck into all of that after the headlines with Parole.
Patrick, thank you. Good evening. Boris Johnson has rejected the findings of the inquiry looking into partygate, which has reported that Mr Johnson deliberately misled Parliament. The report has said the former Prime Minister was guilty of serious contempt and complicit in a campaign attempting to abuse and intimidate the committee. Mr Johnson describes the findings as a deranged conclusion, and he accused the inquiry itself of hypocrisy. The former Prime Minister would have faced a recommended suspension of 90 days had he not quit as an MP. Well, MPs will now debate the Privileges Committee report into his conduct on Monday. The Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner has said today he should never have been Prime Minister.
Well, I think the Privileges Committee is pretty damning. You know, it's serious. Boris Johnson is not only a lawbreaker but a liar. He's not fit for public office and he's disgraced himself and continues to act like a, pound-shop Trump in the way in which he tries to discredit anybody who criticises his actions when actually a decent public servant would have done the honourable thing, would have had a little bit of humility and would have apologised to the British public for what they put them through.
Well, here's how voters have been reacting to the report.
He did an excellent job in a difficult situation, so I don't see how they can down him now for what he made a mistake. So did hundreds of others. They don't get followed up.
He's the kind of guy that if you were having a party, you'd want him to come. He's a nice, fun guy, but as leader of the country, no.
Under the circumstances, yes, things, could have been different, but still, nobody else could have done it. He got the job done.
Well, it's been confirmed that by-elections in Uxbridge and South Ruislip and Selby and Ainsty for Boris Johnson and Nigel Adams, respectively, will be held on July the 20th. Now, people are beginning to gather in Nottingham city centre ahead of a vigil at 5:30 for the 3 victims of Tuesday's knife attacks. In just under an hour, at 6 o'clock, the city and the nation will fall silent as a mark of respect to first-year students Grace O'Malley Kumar and Barnaby Webber and local school caretaker Ian Coates. This morning, the Home Secretary paid tribute to them by laying a wreath outside Nottingham Council House in Market Square. It comes as detectives have been given a further 36 hours to question the prime suspect, whom it's been confirmed was a former student of the university. All 3 Britons who died after a dive boat caught fire off Egypt have been named. Stephen Hill and Paul Darling were taking part in a scuba diving lesson when the vessel burst into flames on Sunday. It was announced yesterday that 58-year-old Christina Quinn, who is a chief executive of a hospice in Plymouth, was also killed in the fire. The mother of a 9-year-old boy who was repeatedly beaten has been jailed for 27 years. Alfie Steele had 50 injuries on his body and was found dead in his home in Worcestershire. Carla Scott was sentenced for child cruelty and the manslaughter of her son, while her partner, Dirk Howell, has been jailed for life with a minimum term to serve of 32 years.
At no stage has either Scott or Howell shown any sign of remorse or acceptance of responsibility for their actions. The custodial sentences passed on Howell and Scott are a clear reflection of the abhorrent physical and emotional abuse they both inflicted upon Alfie. And while I recognise that no sentence will ever undo the dreadful abuse that Alfie suffered. It does mean that Scott and Hal will now face the consequences of their sickening actions.
DCI Leighton Harding there of the police, West Mercia Police, in fact, speaking there. Now, a double child killer has been granted parole and will be released from prison subject to conditions. Colin Pitchfork was jailed for life in 1998 for murdering 2 teenagers. He strangled 15-year-olds Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth in Leicestershire in the 1980s. The Ministry of Justice plans to ask the Parole Board to reconsider its decision. And lastly, tributes have been pouring in for the double Oscar-winning actress and former Labour MP Glenda Jackson, who's died at the age of 87. She died peacefully this morning at her home in London with her family around her. She gave up acting to join the House of Commons as an MP for 23 years. Former Labour Prime Minister Sir Tony Blair has described Glenda Jackson as a truly formidable woman who will be much missed. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Back now to Patrick.
We'll have more on Boris Johnson shortly, but before all of that, here's my views on a story that I think should be getting a lot more media attention than it is. I think people making decisions at our Home Office are an absolute disgrace. A refugee from Sudan has been found guilty of raping a sleeping university student. Adam Mohammed reportedly followed some students home after seeing them buy booze in a shop and claimed to be studying for a master's degree and living on campus, which is why they then let him in. The victim passed out drunk and was put to bed by her mates. They left the door unlocked. Mohammed then went in and he raped her. But this is the real kicker. Mohammed was granted final leave to remain in Britain last year by the Home Office, despite the fact that he was already facing a rape charge. But that's not all, folks, no. He already had one conviction for an offence of battery committed outside a nightclub in Exeter in January 2022. Why was this guy even in the country? Oh, I'll tell you, actually. He apparently came to Britain aged 16 in October 2016 via Libya, via Italy, via France, and was part of a scheme to resettle underage refugees. Who is making decisions that characters like this guy are safe to be allowed into Britain in the first place? Who in their right minds would think he would be a good addition to our country? What was he offering? It's a complete joke. It comes after an asylum seeker murdered an aspiring Royal Marine in an e-scooter incident in Bournemouth. He'd already killed 2 people abroad and had drug offences to his name as well. How many more lives have to be ruined because we'll just let anyone in? If they've committed crimes before coming to Britain, they shouldn't be allowed in. If they commit crimes whilst in Britain, they should be deported. Simple. Yeah, more on this a little bit later on, but I wanted your views, gbviews@gbnews.com. Get them coming in. We'll have more on that story a little bit later. Yes, but back to our top story, and that is that Boris Johnson has been branded the first Prime Minister to have lied to the House of Commons by an explosive report into Partygate. The Privileges Committee says that he deliberately misled MPs before being complicit in a campaign of abuse and intimidation. But Johnson has hit back, calling the findings of the report tripe and completely deranged. So here's what the committee found. Boris Johnson deliberately misled the House. It recommended a 90-day suspension from the Commons, which would have triggered a by-election if Johnson hadn't resigned as MP. The committee said Johnson shouldn't be granted a former member's pass. It found there had been a deliberate attack on democratic institutions. It also said that Johnson had what it called conveniently been flexible with his interpretation of the rules on gatherings. Well, OK, all right. But there are serious accusations of rampant and massive political bias of this particular committee, whether or not the people in there broke the rules themselves, and why on earth this committee appears to trump the actual Met Police when it comes to their findings. And crucially, fundamentally, whether or not this was a witch hunt that saw an incredibly democratically elected Prime Minister ousted by political opponents essentially, for the most part, behind closed doors. Here's what GB News presenter and Conservative MP Jacob Rees-Mogg had to say when he criticised this report.
Parliament sometimes makes a great mistake when it tries to stand on its dignity. In the old days, people who said disobliging things about Parliament were summoned to the bar of the House. They last did this with John Junor in the 1950s when he accused members of fiddling their petrol allowances. The House of Commons made itself, in its righteousness, look foolish. And I think that this report is in danger of making the House of Commons look foolish.
What I would say about the committee is they deserve respect, but in order to get respect, they actually have to behave themselves in a respectful way. Now, I was there when Boris Johnson gave his evidence, and that committee was sitting in what they say is a quasi-judicial role, like a jury in a court. But unlike a jury in a court, some of the members of that committee were pulling faces, they turning their backs on Boris. I mean, it was absolutely extraordinary behaviour. And if it were a court, the judge would have called it to order.
OK, well, look, joining me now is Tom Harwood, our deputy political editor, with me in the studio. Tom, before we pick the bones out of this report again, just an interesting development, because yesterday on this show it emerged that someone who was on this committee, Bernard Jenkins, maybe in a little bit of hot water himself. I mean, you hate to see it. Maybe a little bit of hot water himself over allegations about booze and cake and lockdowns and wives' birthdays and stuff. What else has happened since then? Is there something?
Well, this has been a fast-moving story. Of course, there had been reporting to the police yesterday due to these serious allegations and the fact that there was no outright denial from Bernard Jenkins over this December 2020 birthday party for his wife Anne Jenkins in Parliament at a time when there were Tier 2 restrictions, lockdown-style restrictions on gatherings, large gatherings, which this appears to have breached. Well, now we can understand, or at least the Guido Fawkes website is reporting that the Metropolitan Police have contacted the Speaker's office to confirm they're investigating a formal complaint made about Bernard Jenkins yesterday. Wow. That's following the report that first appeared in the Guido Fawkes, on the Guido Fawkes website during your airtime. And it is a big question mark now over the propriety of this committee, a committee with only 7 members. First, we learn, of course, that the chair of this committee, Harriet Harman, had indeed tweeted that she believed Boris Johnson had lied to the House already, which is what many people would think is a prejudicial statement.
Sounds like it, doesn't it?
And now we learn that someone who has been taking a pretty pious position on this panel, saying to Boris Johnson that don't you know how many people were dying and all the rest of it, it turns out that he is now under serious accusations of breaching those same rules himself, which does pull into question some of his questioning. If Bernard Jenkins believes he is innocent, but other people believe that he attended a lockdown-breaching event, doesn't that show that perhaps in his own mind he might be telling the truth, but in someone else's mind, he might not be? Doesn't that fundamentally undermine the purpose of this inquiry? Trying to get inside someone's head and determine, well, you were knowingly lying to the House. Well, was Bernard Jenkins knowingly lying, or did he think he was within the rules because there was some attempt at social distancing or whatever it was? Might it be that these rules are actually fairly amorphous and different people thought different things about them at the time? I think that is what is the core of this Bernard Jenkins story. To some extent, it undermines all of the logic of this 130-page, 30,000-word report.
Yes, and it's almost like we will only know Bernard Jenkins' true motives after we've had another inquiry, which I personally, for one, cannot wait for. But
Patrick, are you saying that after the Sue Gray inquiry, the Metropolitan Police investigation and the Privileges Committee investigation, that's not enough? We need more.
Look, are you telling me there was cake involved? Because if the answer to that is yes, then we have to take this to court. But anyway, right, look, let's have a look through some of the other things that they've found against Boris Johnson here. You've got deliberately misleading the House of Commons, so that's the bit where you've got to get in his mind. Deliberately misleading the committee, same. Breaching confidence, this is where for me it actually gets quite sinister. Breaching confidence, impugning the committee and thereby undermining the democratic process of the House, being complicit in the campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation of the committee. There's a lot about the committee there, not actually a lot about whether or not he really stood up in the House of Commons and lied, whether or not he had, full frontal discos at Downing Street.
This section of the report you're reading is where it determines that a 90-day suspension is what should be recommended. That is the second longest suspension that any MP has been recommended since the Second World War. It's extraordinary, the length of time. And you're right, of those A, B, C, D and E options, 4 out of the 5 are about how he behaves in front of this committee.
Yeah. 1
is about what he said in Parliament.
This is the kind of report you get from, and I would know this actually, from HR when they really want you out.
I wouldn't know anything about that.
It is.
But the interesting point here is that this is a committee that does seem a little bit aggrieved. And perhaps they're well within their right to. They talk about Boris Johnson impugning their motives, about undermining the democratic institutions of the House, basically being mean to the committee. That's what they've really taken offence at. And that's why this is a suspension that is perhaps even 3 times as long as the COVID-carrying Margaret Ferrier MP, who ferried COVID backwards and forwards and backwards again from Scotland to London to Scotland and to many different establishments along the way. She got recommended a 30-day suspension. Boris Johnson, 90 days.
90, but crucially not as long as Keith Vaz for doing that. Tom, thank you very much. Tom Harwood.
Do you mean Keith Vaz or do you mean Jim the washing machine salesman?
Jim the washing machine salesman, thank you. Yes, Tom, sorry, my mind, I slipped myself there. Tom Harwood, GBNews' Deputy Political Editor. Good stuff, thank you very much. Right, OK, so joining me now is the former member of the European Parliament for East of England. It's David Campbell-Bannerman. David, thank you very much. Do you think that Boris Johnson has been victim to a political stitch-up here, or actually is he a demonstrable liar and should never work again?
No, I think it's absolutely disgraceful what's happened. I mean, I gave up my job as an MEP to fight for parliamentary sovereignty, to argue for Brexit. And here we have Parliament being undermined by the action of this committee. I mean, Stalinist what's going on. That kind of punishment is well beyond any sort of alleged crime, and they haven't proven it. You've got this top lawyer, Lord Panic, saying there is no evidence for this. So the whole thing is demeaning, and then you get these alleged allegations now, well, charges, as you just reported, potentially against Bernard Jenkin and the chairman. I mean, what judge would sit there tweeting, I think the defendant is guilty 3 times? I mean, that wouldn't be allowed in the court of law, and their behaviour is disgraceful.
It's asking someone, and this is, I mean, one of the areas where, for me personally, it all falls down. I can believe that Boris Johnson wasn't running a particularly tight ship. Absolutely. I can believe that throughout all of that lockdown madness, on occasion, Boris Johnson didn't necessarily behave that well. And I can also very much understand why people feel incredibly aggrieved about that. You know, not going to funerals, distancing at hospitals, etc. So I don't want to try to diminish that whatsoever. But what is happening here is we are asking people who've already expressed the overt opinion that this guy's an out-and-out liar to then judge at the taxpayer's expense whether or not he's a liar. And that's just madness.
Yeah, it is madness. I mean, the point about this, it's not, he's already apologised for the actions of the government. We've established that Parliament was misled, but it was unwitting. It wasn't deliberate, as this committee has found. And that is wrong, in my view. And they came up with another invented charge, recklessly misled, which it doesn't even have the force of legal backing. So it's the behaviour of this committee that has really brought Parliament into disrepute. And that is what we're talking about. It's not about the facts. They've already been established. It's just about whether he deliberately is misled. I mean, it's really very hard to believe he went out of his way to deliberately mislead the House of Commons. And that
do you not think there's something,
in my view.
Do you not think there's something fascinating, though, David, about this guy who ruffles a lot of feathers? A lot of people didn't like him because of this perceived privilege that he had growing up, and he's a bit of a posho and all of this stuff. A lot of people as well, I think on the left, cannot get their heads around the idea that this guy, who looks a bit scruffy, a bit portly, you know, speaks with a very, very posh accent, goes down so well with the working class. Better than a lot of the champagne socialists in the Labour Party. He wins an absolutely stonky majority at the last general election. The mainstream media, and I will just say this, the snivelling lefties that clamber into most of the mainstream media offices on a daily basis, do not like this guy at all. They all want him out, and then there is a massive concerted effort to hammer him in the media, hammer him elsewhere as well, even trying to take the Met Police to court over not doing enough to investigate him, for goodness sake. I mean, when you look at it all like that, do you think people could be forgiven for thinking this isn't complete and utter stitch-up, and actually quite anti-democratic as well?
It's totally anti-democratic. It undermines, as I say, parliamentary democracy, parliamentary sovereignty. It really does cause the whole system into question. I think they're going to have to replace the Privileges Committee, have some proper lawyers look at this, you know, with proper legal rules subject to Parliament. You know, this has been hijacked by various political agendas, including on the Conservative side. It's not good enough to say there's 4 Tories. Well, how many of them are actually pro-Boris? Actually, you know, like the guy, you know, but Bernard Jenkins seems to have a vendetta allegedly against him, and the others seem to go along with this. So the whole thing has been appalling, and it is Stalinist.
Yeah, it's pathetic. And actually, you know what? We could have saved everyone a lot of time and a lot of taxpayers' money. I want to know exactly how much this report has cost, because basically this report could have been written in seconds, which is, we think Boris Johnson's a liar, we don't like him, well, let's have a quick chat with him, right, liar. And then that's it. Look, David, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very, very much for your time. It's David Campbell-Bannerman there, who is the former member of the European Parliament for the East of England. Your emails are making for very enlightening reading, actually. Patrick, I'm incandescent with the latest report of Boris's behaviour during COVID lockdown. It's unbelievable. This is a kangaroo court. That was from Brenda. Then we've got Richard. That committee has no credibility. The personnel involved said they were guilty before they were even convened. I mean, this is just endless. So there we go. GBviews at gbnews.uk. When I come back, I'm going to be talking a bit about whether or not you think, that we've removed the best Prime Minister we've ever had. But you can get more on this story at gbnews.com, with the fastest growing national news website in the country, I will have you know. It's got the best analysis, best opinion, as well as the latest breaking news. But I'm also going to have this story, OK? And this will drive you mad if you haven't heard it already. A Sudanese refugee has been convicted of rape. But get this, he was given the right to live permanently in the UK after he'd already been charged. I mean, will we just let anyone live here? I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, in just a few minutes' time, grief, I will be asking whether or not Boris Johnson could have been our greatest ever Prime Minister. Is this what has happened? Do you think? Strong views on both sides of this, strong views on both sides, as to whether or not we've basically biffed a bloke who could have been the best, or up there, anyway. So I'll go to your views on that shortly. But there's another update on the legal case involving Prince Harry as well. Yes, could he really be deported from the United States? I tell you what, I better not come back here, but there we go. But now to this shocking story of the Sudanese refugee who's been convicted of rape. Adam Mohammed was found guilty of attacking a University of Exeter student in 2021. Incredibly, he was given final leave to remain in Britain last year by the Home Office, even though he'd already been charged with rape. Yeah, that's right. I am joined now by research fellow at the Bow Group, Benjamin Loughnane. Benjamin, thank you very much. We have a Sudanese refugee who was charged with rape, had also been involved in another violent incident, and someone in our Home Office decided that this guy should be given leave to remain in this country. What's happened?
Yeah, it's absolutely disgraceful. I think, on the first hand, these people largely aren't actually refugees, they're economic migrants. They shouldn't be granted leave to remain regardless. But once they've committed a crime, you'd think there's an even higher bar, there's an even greater reason to then reject them and to deport them. I think the Home Office is just actually fundamentally now so weak, and the Home Secretary, in fact, is responsible for this. It's the weakness, it's the lack of backbone to just say if people commit crimes, which they do by coming into this country illegally in the first place, but then serious crimes, violent crimes, sexual crimes, so on and so forth, we should fast track them for deportation.
Should we not also, even if somebody has taken the completely idiotic decision to allow a man who's a rapist to stay in this country, a violent rapist as well, to stay in this country, once it's been proven beyond doubt that indeed this individual is both of those things, we should be able to review that decision and then deport them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, look, we've got enough criminals in our country who are citizens of the country. We don't need to bring everyone else's criminals here as well and then give them the right to remain. I think, frankly, if you look at the foreign-born prison population in this country, it's a huge number. It's in the thousands. And each of those prisoners is costing us about 40 grand a year to keep locked up. And that's just an enormous burden on the taxpayer. Not only is it a danger to public safety, a danger to the people of this country, the whole principle of refugees is that we're giving them a better or a safer life. We shouldn't be giving the people of this country a less safe life by bringing them in. But it's not just that, the economic burden as well. I think there's no argument in favour of this.
And, I mean, obviously, the thoughts go to the victim, and that is a life sentence for that individual, given the nature of this horrific crime. And nothing that ever... I mean, the chances are that whatever prison sentence this guy gets, be out in however many years, back out to enjoy what this country has to offer, free in the knowledge that we can't deport him back to Sudan. The reality, Benjamin, at the moment, unfortunately, is that if you say you are from a country that is war-torn or that's just a hot mess, you can get to this country knowing that even if you rape someone, we can't send you back there. And surely that has to change.
Yeah, it's absolutely disgraceful. I mean, if you look at if he has a life sentence, chances are he won't serve it. At most, he'll serve about 15 years, probably. If you look at the way sentencing tends to work in this country, people don't tend to serve the full sentence. But even if he does, that's 30-odd years at 40 grand a year. The cost of that, to keep him locked up for that long, just deport him, get it over with, send him back to Sudan. I'm sorry, but it is not our job to pay to keep this man locked up here.
And is there an issue with the cultural norms from a lot of people that are coming over here? I feel as though we are sitting on a little bit of a powder keg in the sense that, and it's something I think the left ignores a lot, which is that if we are importing a lot of people from countries that do not share our norms and values at all, that's going to be an issue at some point.
Absolutely. I think if you have immigration, mass immigration, certainly, you do need to put an emphasis on integration. People do need to be integrated properly into the community. These cultural differences can be extremely dangerous and at times very troubling. I think we just don't have the strength or the backbone to assert our culture anymore. We say, come over here and we'll conform to you or we'll integrate with you. It should be the other way around.
Yeah, indeed. And I think it's worthwhile noting as well that whilst people in the media, a large part of the media anyway, have been absolutely losing their minds about maybe a bit of cake and whether or not somebody saw a birthday party taking place. I really want to know how many people like this, someone in the Home Office, is letting into our country. I would argue that that is the bigger news. But Benjamin, we're going to have to leave it there for now, I'm afraid, my good man. Thank you for your time today. It's Benjamin Loughnane there, who is a research fellow at the Bow Group, just reacting to that absolute scandal of a story that this individual from Sudan was given leave to remain, even despite the fact that he'd raped someone in this country and was done for a violent offence. I mean, the mind boggles, doesn't it? But there we are. Still to come, though, between now and 6 o'clock. As many people write Boris Johnson's political obituary, we're going to have a debate here. We're going to take a different angle, OK? Have we booted out the man who could have been the greatest Prime Minister we've ever had? Is that what's happened? And there's the latest on whether or not Prince Harry will be deported from the United States after admitting to taking drugs. But first, it's your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's take you straight to the centre of Nottingham, where we understand a vigil is taking place for the 3 victims of Tuesday's knife attacks. That vigil beginning around now, 17:30, 5:30. Everyone's been asked to go to Market Square outside Nottingham City Council House. You can see they're beginning to gather there and preparing for a moment in just under half an hour at 6 o'clock. The city and the nation probably falling silent as a mark of respect to students Grace O'Malley-Kumar and Barnaby Webber, and local school caretaker Ian Coates, who all lost their lives in a brutal fashion on Tuesday morning. That silence at 6 o'clock. We will be respecting that silence here at GB News as well as Michelle Dewberry comes in for her programme. Well, I can tell you that earlier today, the Home Secretary paid tribute to those who'd lost their lives by laying a wreath outside Nottingham Council House. And it comes as detectives have been given a further 36 hours to question the prime suspect, whom it's been confirmed was a former student of the university in Nottingham. Well, also in the news today, as you've been hearing, Boris Johnson has rejected the findings of the partygate inquiry, which says he deliberately misled Parliament. The report said the former Prime Minister was guilty of serious contempt and complicit in the attempted abuse and intimidation of the committee itself. Mr Johnson describes the findings as a deranged conclusion and accused the inquiry of hypocrisy. MPs will now debate the report on Monday. All 3 Britons who died after a dive boat caught fire off the coast of Egypt have been named. Stephen Hill and Paul Darling were both taking part in a scuba diving lesson when the vessel burst into flames on Sunday, and it was announced last night that 58-year-old Christina Quinn, who was the chief executive of a hospice in Plymouth, also lost her life in that fire. A double child killer has been granted parole and will be released from prison subject to conditions. Colin Pitchfork was jailed for life in 1998 for murdering two teenagers. He strangled 15-year-olds Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth in Leicestershire in the 80s. The Ministry of Justice plans to ask the Parole Board to reconsider that decision. More detail on all of those stories, head to our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And getting you up to date on all the numbers from today, the pound will buy you $1.2768 and €1.1672 euros. The price of gold, £1,534 and 86 pence an ounce. The FTSE 100 closing today at 7,628.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Back to the top story, and the long-awaited Privileges Committee report has found that the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was, quote, deliberately disingenuous about Partygate events. The report by the 7-member Privileges Committee, which is not in any way controversial at all, states that if Boris Johnson were still an MP, it would recommend a suspension for 90 days. But as this could no longer apply, they've ensured that the former Prime Minister will not get a parliamentary pass. But will this damage his reputation among Conservative MPs? And what does the findings of the report mean for his prospects of any future political comeback? But I want to ask this question today, OK? This started out initially with a slow drip of information about Partygate and all of these rumours and these rumblings. And then the media really got it in for this guy. And then what happened was he, to be honest, didn't necessarily cover himself in glory all the time. But then, his political opponents got involved. And we've had this committee that has been led by a woman who has previously already come out and tweeted that he was a liar. There's a guy on it who may well have broken the lockdown rules himself. And supposedly, according to the latest reports on Guido Fawkes' website, the Metropolitan Police are aware about that. And then he goes, and this report comes out that despite the fact that the Metropolitan Police looked at every single incident that this report looks into as well, and only fined him once, and that was for a bit of cake at his desk. This report now decides that Boris Johnson was a demonstrable liar who behaved against the rules. Have we actually booted out the best Prime Minister maybe ever? Joining me now is Political Associate Editor at The Telegraph, Christopher Hope, and the former Labour Minister for Europe, Dennis McShane. Christopher, I will start with you. Have we biffed someone who had the potential to have been Britain's greatest PM?
That was certainly what newspapers like The Times were saying back in September 2021. That newspaper did a front-page story saying Boris Johnson to be Prime Minister for the entire decade of the 2020s, and no one questioned it. It all went wrong very rapidly on the Owen Paterson affair. Then these parties were discovered and reported on, and then then it became a big row about who knew what when, and the suitcase of booze on Johnson's watch. He was a Prime Minister. And we fast forward to just last week when he got his report in, the draft conclusions. He immediately thought, well, I'm off then, that's it. I mean, he hasn't lost an election in 28 years. The last one was a very small by-election back in the early noughties. Since then, he's won 2 terms in London and the landslide election into Parliament behind me. So yes, you are right to say he's probably the most successful leader, certainly probably since Tony Blair, I think, and certainly political leader for the Tory party since Margaret Thatcher, just by the size of his win back in 2019. But he didn't have the discipline to stay in control of it. He had 3 opportunities to stop this inquiry. He didn't take them. He could have stopped the inquiry being set up. He could have dropped Harriet Harman with the issue of the tweets that you mentioned, I revealed in Telegraph. He could have easily said, sorry, Harriet Harman, you're the wrong person. I'll vote against this. I'll get our team to vote against it. He could have taken a reckless charge, not a deliberately misleading charge on the House of Commons. He took no opportunity. He dug his heels in. He got cross. He was given a 40-day suspension, Patrick, that was the weekend. That was doubled to 90 days by this committee because they were so cross about how he behaved. He hasn't helped himself, is my point.
No, I understand that. Dennis, I'll throw it over to you now. He's former Labour Minister for Europe. Dennis McShane. Boris Johnson won an absolutely stonking majority at the last general election, led us through a pandemic, and now, in light of what the Privileges Committee would have given him, which was a 90-day suspension, the only person with a greater suspension than that would have been Keith Vaz, who was willing to procure naughties for naughties, to put it that way. I mean, it's remarkable, Dennis, isn't it?
Not really. I mean, can we just dispel some myths? By the way, I really think Christopher Hope should have gone and worked for Boris Johnson, because Christopher laid out all the things that Boris should have done, didn't. And, you know, he only has to read the Daily Telegraph. I read it every day because I want that kind of wisdom. I wish I'd read it when I was an MP. Maybe I'll still be one now. Anyway, go back to Mr. Johnson. Every European leader fought COVID in exactly the same way. Maybe he was 5 days earlier or 5 days later. Let's stop that guff. In 2008, he defeated an unpopular Ken Livingstone, an unpopular Labour Party under Gordon Brown, with a very unpopular policy of extending the congestion charge west of Chelsea to cover the whole of West London. There was no way Boris couldn't win. In 2019, the Labour Party, as it does so brilliantly in its history, gifted the country an unsuitable Tory Prime Minister. Jeremy Corbyn created Boris Johnson's premiership. So stop the guff. When the good fairy descended on the cradle of Boris when he was a baby, she gave him so many gifts. But being a sane, normal, Daily Telegraphy type of normal Conservative wasn't one of them. He was not cut out to be a Prime Minister.
All right, Chopper, I'll throw it back your way. Now, what it would appear, and certainly people in the inbox and getting in touch with me on Twitter as well are saying, which is that ridiculous, biased individuals like Harriet Harman have been able to wrestle us away from the most popular Prime Minister that they've ever had. And there just seems something a bit rum. Is there a school of thought that says that, you know, Boris could have really been great if we'd have just let him crack Tom?
Well, I think he needed some good advisors around him. He didn't have anybody who could sort of control him. He had a good team in City Hall that Dennis alluded to. He had Eddie Lister, Will Walden doing the press, Kit Malthouse, now an MP. These people could direct him and protect him also, really often from himself and one of his, you know, some of when he gets it goes wrong, I suppose. But that's part of the problem with Johnson. He needs good friends, and has found he hasn't got any. I mean, we're looking forward here in Parliament to Monday, when MPs vote on this report. It's a one-line whip. Most MPs, I think, are going to abstain. I suspect fewer than 20 Tory MPs are going to vote against that report, and that all showed, I think, to the parliamentary party that Johnson has now gone, at least until the next election. And whether he comes back after that is a different question. Probably, maybe, for a new leader if Keir Starmer becomes next Prime Minister, as the polls suggest.
You know, Dennis, look at what came before Boris Johnson. I mean, Tony Blair, pretty much, your mate, pretty much all of the country's problems that we have at the minute can in some one way or another be traced back to old Tone, right? and then we've got Theresa May, we've had Gordon Brown in no particular order. Rishi Sunak's not been much cop since. Keir Starmer, good grief, it looks like we're lining him up. I mean, you look at it in the light here, Boris Johnson would have been fantastic, and we got rid of him.
It's a lovely idea. I repeat, all those guys, men and women you mentioned, I'm sorry, I'm not buying into the idea Tony Blair was a sort of disaster you imply, but he was a serious politician. He did a long apprenticeship as an MP. He thought hard. He took big decisions, independence of the Bank of England, other big issues, putting 20,000 cops on the streets, building a relationship again with America and Europe that had been destroyed under the useless John Major. But this is silly. I mean, we can all go through the useless PMs we've had, and we've certainly had plenty in the last 20 or 30 years. But it's just that Boris got so many gifts. I always loved his company, but he just had none of them.
You think he's removed himself? I understand that. Look, both of you, thank you very much. Thank you for entering into the spirit of this discussion as well. Much appreciated, both of you. As Christopher Hope there, of course, the political associate editor at the Daily Telegraph, and the former Labour Minister for Europe, Dennis McShane. Good stuff, chaps. Thank you. Right, OK, so we are the People's Channel. So we wanted to find out what you, the great British public, thought about Boris Johnson and the Partygate report. I sincerely hope that we haven't gone out and interviewed anyone who's been emailing into this inbox, because it is quite fruity. Let's see what happened.
To blow it out of proportion. I think the amount of work what they've all done, I think they deserve a little drink at least, don't they? Do you know what I mean?
And what do you think to Boris Johnson as a person?
I like him. He's educated. He was on 1.5 million a year, and then he went to be Prime Minister. Obviously, he's made his name now. He's going to have his picture in 10 Downing Street on the stairway. I think he's done well, and I think he was a good Prime Minister. He had a tough job with COVID, and I think he managed it brilliantly.
I think he did an absolutely fantastic job with COVID, and I don't think anybody else could have done any better.
No, definitely. No, he definitely did a fantastic job. Under the circumstances, yes, things, could have been different, but still, nobody else could have done it. He got the job done.
No, not really. I think that everybody in government, they're all a set of liars and what have you. And as I said, when we're coming up to a general election, they promise everything, and when you get in, you get nothing. So that's the way I feel about it.
He's very creative in the way that he twists and turns the table or the situation to his benefit. So he's very clever to say, to be on the nice side of things. He's very clever in the way that he manipulates his words to make it seem like he's doing good.
No, he's not been punished enough. While everybody else was in lockdown and their families were in hospital, he was having parties, so he didn't respect the rules that he was placing.
I don't think he's been punished enough. I don't expect there to be any further punishment. I think it's just an example of the problems that we have with the current system of government at the moment, where those in power and those who are in leadership have one set of rules and everybody else has another.
Went on a bit, that, didn't it? OK, well, it's a mixed bag of views there, and gbviews at gbnews.com if you agree with them. I've got loads more coming your way. In fact, very shortly, I'm going to be talking about whether or not the United States government has actually blocked the release of Prince Harry's visa records. Well, they have, but this won't be the end of it. He could potentially be deported after admitting taking drugs. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before
and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel. Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, I'm taking the show on the road. We'll be live in Lee with Liz Truss, where the former Prime Minister will escape the Westminster bubble to be quizzed live by you, our amazing GB News viewers.
We're getting out of Westminster. We're going to listen to what people are saying. Join us at 9 o'clock. We're on GB News, me and Dan Wootton. Look forward to seeing you then.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Evening, everybody. Now, Prince Harry's US visa remains under wraps following a decision by the Department of Homeland Security. The DHS rejected a request by the Heritage Foundation think tank for the Duke of Sussex's immigration records to be published. So, the lawyer for them, Samuel Dewey, slammed the decision as a stonewall. They're stonewalling its request, saying that it shows an appalling lack of transparency by the Biden administration and that the foundation would contest the decision. Well, this is interesting. So joining me now to discuss this further is royal broadcaster and commentator Rafe Haydel-Mancu. Now, Rafe, if this centres around whether or not Prince Harry was honest about his drug taking on his visa application, because if he was not, then presumably he should have been deported. If he was, presumably he shouldn't have been let in the first place. Someone's hiding something.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So the Heritage Foundation is the world's preeminent conservative think tank, and it's had the Department for Homeland Security in its crosshairs for quite some time over the issue of immigration and if it's applying immigration law equally, primarily in relation to the Mexican border, but also whether it's applying it equally to celebrities and giving them the same treatment everyone else has. In the past, the US was very strict on issues of drugs. For example, in 2010, Pete Doherty, the singer from the Libertines, landed at JFK in New York and was put on a flight right out of it again because of his drug convictions. Nigella Lawson, a few years later, was prevented from boarding a flight in Heathrow to America because of her drug admissions in the past. And so, given all of this, they really wanted to see whether Harry, as you say, had lied on his visa application form. There are two questions relating to drugs. Did he answer those truthfully? If so, why was he admitted? Or did he lie? In which case, why isn't he being deported? And we know, of course, from Spare and Netflix and everywhere else that he has admitted to taking cocaine, marijuana, magic mushrooms. The judge had given the Department for Homeland Security 1 week to decide the issue, but now we know that weeks pass and they're not going to be divulging it. They say that there's not enough public interest to supersede Prince Harry's privacy, but the Heritage Foundation are saying, well, look, this man's given up his right to privacy because it's been on Netflix. He's discussed it in Spare, and so now it's up for the judge to decide who has the greater argument.
But also, I mean, talking of privacy, what about privilege? I mean, it's conceivably possible that Prince Harry, being who he is, did not have to comply with the same kind of visa regulations as you and I, or indeed anybody else for that matter. For a bloke who tries to earth himself with the common man and woman, that's not very normal, is it?
Well, this is the big question indeed. Does America have a two-tiered system when it comes to the application of the law? It would seem to me, I mean, most people would think, well, look, to avoid that perception, it's in the government's interest to disclose this information. The Department for Homeland Security is curiously saying that there's not enough media interest in the USA to justify releasing this information, to which the Heritage Foundation has said, well, the Mail Online is read by 100 million Americans every month. They're very interested. I'm sure GB News has lots of viewers in America who are very keen on this story.
Well,
so yeah, the New York Times and the Washington Post may not be covering it.
I tell you what I have got, Rafe.
Here, and Americans are interested.
I'll tell you what I have got, Rafe. I've got a load of Brits over here who are very interested in Prince Harry not coming back. I mean, I actually think it would be a dark day, would it not, if all of a sudden Harry gets deported back to this country?
Yeah, exactly. You've got American Conservatives, fingers crossed, hoping the Heritage Foundation wins. You've got British Conservatives, fingers crossed, hoping they don't.
We're going to end up fighting over Prince Harry, aren't we? No, you are like the opposite of a messy divorce call where they're fighting over the kids. Like, no, you have him. No, you have him. But anyway, Rafe, I've got to leave it. I've got to leave it there, Rafe. Look, thank you. Always a pleasure. Short and sweet, but great stuff. Rafe Haydomanku there, royal broadcaster, commentator, friend of the show, friend of the channel. Now, there's less than 2 weeks to go until I dance on stage with the Dream Boys, who are a group of male strippers. And this afternoon, you have sentenced me, you lovely people, to another painful experience. Earlier today, I said that if we were on £57,500, OK? I was raising that for the mental health charity Mind. I said to you that if we got past 60 grand, can I say by this time tomorrow, yes, you had another 24 hours, yeah, then I'd get my chest waxed on camera. Well, you've raised now, nearly 63 grand. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. I should have set the bar higher. This is all for a really good cause. You can donate by going to justgiving.com/fundraising/Challenge Christys. That's justgiving.com/fundraising/Challenge Christys. That's the little link at the bottom of your screen there. All for a very worthy cause. Let's save some lives. The money that you have raised so far will save lives. It's for Mind. And can I also just say as well, what I have to do is strip on stage with the Dream Boys, who are all buff, and I am not buff. So there is some deep-seated personal toll and discomfort and humiliation involved in my pie. So if you have got a couple of quid, I'd really appreciate it. justgiving.com/fundraising/Challenge Christys. But anyway, I'll stop rattling the can now. That's that. Very, very different tone now, people. Michelle Dewberry joins me in the studio for Jubes & Co. You've got quite a lot on this
I always get a bit worried when I come in here and then you start talking about your Dream Boy stuff, because then when you say, there's this new development, we're going to do this, and I think, I hope you're not about to do anything in front of me that I'm somehow going to get roped into or anything. I was a bit nervous when you talk about
Polly Middlehurst, our lovely newsreader, has agreed to wax my chest, but we'll have to...
Polly Middlehurst? I mean, what? Our newsreader is going to...
Well, it's a work in progress.
Does she know she's going to do this?
She expressed a keen interest in the...
Did she?
Let's have a break. Yeah.
Did she? Was she half asleep at that point, or was she there? Was she with it?
Possibly, but...
I'm going to check this. Look at... There's Polly. Look at her. Look at her. She's got like a librarian stern glance over the top of her specs going on. She does not look to me like a woman that's got the wax strip poised. I had to stop myself then. You know, when something you forget you're on national telly, you think you might be in the pub.
I get that. That's my show, actually, to be fair. But yeah, so look, you will have a lot coming our way, won't you, over the course of the next hour or so?
I tell you, I'm outraged today by this Colin Pitchfork story. I don't know what's the matter with people. What is going on in this country when you can actually murder, strangle, rape children, and then you hear X amount of years later, he's not a risk to the public anymore, you know, he can go live the rest of his years. You don't get a second chance if you've been murdered to live your life.
But he already did have a second chance. They let him
He did, and straight back in he went. So I'm outraged by that tonight. I do not think he should be out and about on the streets. If I had my way, child killers, when you've got, absolute smooth proof, robust proof, I think there should be the death penalty for these people.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
But loads of people will be outraged by that and think that it's wrong. Of course, I want to get into Boris Johnson as well tonight. I'll tell you a story that's excited me. A company finally getting fined for poor customer service. I'm sick of this, everybody. People don't even answer the phones anymore. They do not answer their telephones. Well, a company's being charged now, fined. The customers get the fine. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and I want to see more of this. But one of my panel members thinks I'm crazy because what she's saying to me is that actually these companies will just increase their prices to cover the fines. Well, how about you just pick up your telephone?
Well, I know a lot could be sorted with that. Now, it's also worthwhile noting that in not long at all, in around, well, probably about half a minute's time, I believe we are going to be going to quite a poignant
We are indeed,
moment,
yeah. So in Nottingham today, there's been a huge coming together for, for the outpouring of grief and love for the victims of that Nottingham situation. Any second now, there will be a 1 minute silence for these people. And I think, actually, we will respect that as well. We all remember the 3 victims. We all remember the horrific scene. Let's take a second now to do a minute to respect them.
So as we've shared our grief in conversation, now let's share together in a moment of silence as we stand together.